Sansa Stark stood upon the highest rampart of Winterfell, the hood of her thick cloak pulled tightly around her face. The wind carried the scent of pine and promise, a crisp, biting air that cut across her cheeks. She recalled those days long ago, running through the courtyards with Arya, then giggling in the warmth of the great hall while Robb teased her about her lace dresses. Yet the Winterfell of her childhood had turned into a place haunted by shadows. The direwolf banners had been replaced. Now a flayed man's grisly device fluttered against the sullen gray sky. It seemed to mock the stones that had once felt so much like home. Still, she remained, for Winterfell was never truly gone from her heart, and because home was not merely a building nor walls of stone. It was a birthright, a duty she had long sought to reclaim. But Sansa was not the same timid girl who had left these battlements in pursuit of fairy-tale romances in King's Landing. The Sansa who had endured Joffrey's torments and witnessed the cruelty of the capital had found a new strength. Slowly but surely, in the cold corridors of the Eyrie, beneath Littlefinger's watchful, calculating eyes, she had learned to be silent and observe. She had learned to wear a mask, to speak the words others wished to hear. And, most importantly, she had learned that knowledge and cunning could wield greater power than any sword. Now, all of that experience had collided with the harsh reality of her return to the north, and the inevitability that she must do whatever it took to survive. Survival was all that mattered, until the day came to thrive. Standing behind her on the battlement walkway, partially hidden by the crenellations, was Petyr Baelish himself. She was no longer sure if she should trust him. The lines of loyalty had grown nebulous, shifting with every day she spent under the same roof as Ramsay Bolton and his father, Roose. Yet Petyr's counsel had brought her to Winterfell in the first place, planting seeds of vengeance, painting an image where she might reclaim her ancestral seat. She had believed she would find a chance to unite the North, to light a spark of rebellion among the great houses still loyal to the Starks. Except reality had proven more complicated, for the Boltons were cunning, entrenched, and dangerously motivated to hold their place as wardens of the North. If Sansa wanted to ensure the safety of her future, and the future of House Stark, she needed to make an unthinkable choice. She was not entirely sure when the decision had solidified in her heart. Perhaps it was the cold calculations she had gleaned from Petyr. Perhaps it was the threat of certain death if she tried to resist. Perhaps, too, it was a yearning to exercise a brand of power she had never been permitted, even in King's Landing. The Boltons had brought her here to legitimize their claim. Why not use that to her own advantage? Still, it felt like a betrayal of everything the name Stark stood for. But Sansa wondered, was it truly betrayal, or was it a means to an end? If the realm was a nest of snakes, did it not behoove her to learn to hiss? Petyr's voice was as soft as a cat's footsteps on stone. "My lady, the hour grows late. Are you certain of your course?" She turned toward him, her eyes narrowed. Even now she could feel him assessing her, trying to gauge whether she had the nerve to do what needed to be done. She spoke with a quiet finality. "I have no choice. My family is gone, scattered. My father, my mother, my brother, there's no one left to protect me. I shall protect myself." Her voice did not waver as she said this, though her heart hammered. His faint smile was that of a man who appreciated a well-played game. "Then I will follow your lead, my lady." Follow, she thought wryly. Petyr Baelish follows no one, only his own ambition. But perhaps for once their interests were aligned. She turned away and looked over the courtyard. The training yard was filled with Bolton men, some idly sparring, some performing menial tasks. The sound of steel rang across the chilly air. That clamor used to be comforting in a different life. Now it sounded like the keening cry of crows. That evening, after she retreated from the battlements, she found herself alone in her chambers, hands folded in her lap, replaying every memory of her time with the Boltons. Ramsay's cruelty was legendary, but these weeks in Winterfell he had been almost courteous. That did not make him kind, but it meant that he recognized she was valuable to him as a wife, an emblem of his new position in the North. She found that if she tempered her words, if she was careful never to oppose him in front of his soldiers or humiliate him before their sworn men, he responded in kind. The notion of forging an alliance with a man who had done such unspeakable things made her stomach twist, but she recognized a harsh truth: the Boltons held all the cards. The Northern Lords might one day rise against them, but not if they believed House Stark stood with the flayed man. And that was the key. Sansa no longer wanted simply to play a piece in someone else's game. She had a plan, a silent, secret vow: harness the Bolton power to reclaim Winterfell, crush the traitors who had abandoned the Stark cause, and then, when the time was ripe, ensure no Bolton threatened her family's legacy again. She would never forget that her father had taught her the worth of honor and loyalty, nor that her mother had shown her the depths of love. But the world had changed, and the daughter of Ned Stark needed more than just a gentle heart to survive its rigors. The next day, she made the first decisive move. Over the morning meal, in the Great Hall, Ramsay and Roose conferred with a small retinue of knights from the Dreadfort, the Karstarks, and some minor lords who had pledged grudging allegiance after the Boltons seized power in the aftermath of Robb Stark's downfall. Sansa walked in, head high, wearing a heavier gown in deep gray, the color reminiscent of House Stark's usual palette but with slight red accents near the cuffs, subtle acknowledgments to House Bolton's banner. She carefully approached the dais where they had gathered. The eyes of the men around the table flickered with interest. She felt their gazes linger on her face, trying to discern her mood, her intention. "My lords," she said, "I trust the morning finds you well." She nodded respectfully. Her courtesy might have seemed meek, but her tone was level and calm. Ramsay observed her with a curious smile. "My lady wife," he said, "you favor us with your presence. Join us." Roose glanced up from his conversation with a sharpness to his gaze. No man wore stillness like Roose Bolton. He was a statue carved from ice, eyes pale and calculating. "Yes, Lady Sansa, we were discussing news from our scouts near Moat Cailin. Seems House Manderley is mustering more men than usual. We do not trust that White Harbor remains entirely committed to our cause." Sansa kept her expression composed. She remembered how the Manderleys had, at times, stayed loyal to House Stark, though they'd always proceeded with caution. "White Harbor is a formidable city," she said. "Lord Wyman Manderley is known for his cunning. But if the city sees too much aggression from Winterfell, my lords, it might spur them to unite with dissenters. Perhaps a softer touch would serve better than force." Her voice rang with an unexpected authority, surprising those seated around her. "I know House Manderley has a long history with mine. Perhaps I can lend some insight if you allow me." Ramsay's grin twitched wider, though it did not reach his cold eyes. "Ah, see that, father? My lady wife would do us the courtesy of her counsel." He turned to the other men around the table. "Lady Sansa was born and bred here at Winterfell. Who better to understand the minds of the North?" He reached out and beckoned her closer, guiding her to stand near him. Roose's expression remained unreadable, but he inclined his head. "Yes. Let us hear the lady's suggestions. We cannot rely on fear alone to keep the North in line." And so Sansa ventured further, carefully expounding on the virtues of a measured approach, sending letters that invoked Stark heritage, awarding White Harbor certain trade concessions that might allay their concerns, reminding them that if they allied with the Boltons as part of Winterfell's rightful domain, the old ties to House Stark would be honored by Sansa herself. The men listened. They offered questions. In that moment, with the flickering torchlight playing across the map laid out on the table, Sansa felt a tremor of accomplishment. She was shaping policy. She was being heard. She remembered a time when Joffrey had snickered at her every word, mocking her suggestions. This was different. These northern men might have had no love for her personally, but they understood that she was a valuable asset and that her knowledge and influence among other lords might serve them. For the first time in many moons, she sensed the slender but tangible possibility of influence. Real power gleaned from compromise. She had no illusions. The Boltons were savage, cunning, and untrustworthy. But she was forging a different path, one that might free her from the chains that had dogged her steps since her father's death. After that day, she was included in more conversations. Ramsay seemed content to indulge her counsel, if only because it amused him to watch her spin her words in the presence of hardened men who never thought a lady's viewpoint mattered. But as the weeks wore on, she discovered that some lords truly valued the practicalities of her proposals. The North was harsh. Every day in winter was a fight for survival. If a single strategic compromise could secure provisions or alliances, it was foolish to dismiss it. Yet beneath that polite discourse, Sansa often felt Ramsay's eyes upon her, as if testing her resolve. If she ever ventured a hint of betrayal, she knew he would not hesitate to punish her in ways that did not bear imagining. It was a daily tightrope walk, but she managed with a new, confident grace. In time, letters were exchanged between Winterfell and White Harbor, as well as with certain other holdouts in the north. No open rebellion materialized, but the tension remained thick. Sansa waited, building relationships quietly. She peppered her letters with references to the old days, especially to her father's sense of fairness, the fealty that existed between House Stark and its bannermen. At times, she received coded letters in return, hinting at uncertain hopes, guarded inquiries about her well-being. She could not risk being too explicit, but she dropped enough suggestions to say, "I am still a Stark, and I do not forget." Meanwhile, beneath the quiet swirl of political maneuvering, the personal dynamics within Winterfell shifted. Roose Bolton tested Sansa's knowledge of the northern houses. Ramsay sought small ways to claim her affection or control it. But something inside Sansa stiffened each time she glimpsed the face of Theon Greyjoy in the courtyard. That hollow expression etched into his features as he slunk from shadow to shadow, performing menial tasks. She knew him as Theon, once a ward of her father, and though he had betrayed the Starks, she could not help but pity him in his current broken state. However, she had no illusions that pity alone could undo the harm done by the Boltons or by Theon himself. One bleak afternoon, she encountered Theon in the hallway leading toward the crypts of Winterfell, the dark corridor lit only by occasional torches flickering against the stone walls. He froze like a startled animal the instant he saw her. She took a step forward, searching his face. He lowered his gaze, shoulders hunching inward. "My lady," he mumbled, voice barely above a whisper. She stepped closer. In a different time, she would have asked him how he came to be so broken, how he survived the horrors that had been inflicted upon him. But she sensed that any direct mention of that pain might terrify him further. Instead, she put on a gentle smile. "Theon, it's all right?" He grimaced, then glanced around as if expecting a guard to leap out. They call me Reek now," he stammered, as darting from side to side. "My lady, do not call me Theon. You mustn't." Sansa's heart clenched. She realized the depths of his conditioning. Yet she could not linger on sympathy too long. If she tried to console him and Ramsay found out, it would complicate everything. And yet she could not entirely resist a kind word. "If ever you need help," she said softly, "I might be able to aid you. But you must be careful." She did not wait for a response, slipping past him, heart pounding. There were eyes everywhere in Winterfell, especially where Ramsay was concerned. She needed to maintain her facade, at least until she had a stronger foothold. Word of Theon's shattered presence reminded her that loyalty could be enforced by fear, an extremely effective tactic the Boltons had mastered. But Sansa had also come to understand that loyalty inspired by respect and by common cause could be more durable. She resolved to continue weaving that subtle tapestry among the lesser lords who might be persuaded to see her as the rightful lady of Winterfell, with the Boltons at her side, at least for now. If the houses truly rallied behind that claim, she might be able to lead them toward a better day. The turning point came in the dead of night, scarcely a moon's turn after her quiet integration into Bolton affairs. She was awakened by the shrill cry of a horn echoing across the courtyard. At first, her heart seized, imagining some new threat. She pulled on a thick robe and hurried to her window. In the moonlight, she saw men scurrying about with torches, the gates being sealed. Moments later, a frantic pounding on her chamber door startled her. She cracked it open. A Bolton guard stood there, face grim. "My lady, Lord Ramsay and Lord Roose request your presence in the Great Hall immediately. There's been an incident." She quickly dressed, her hands shaking only slightly. Incidents involving the Boltons never boded well, but she steeled herself. She had chosen this path. She had to see it through. Down in the Great Hall, torches set the room ablaze with flickering shadows. Ramsay stood near the large wooden doors, flanked by his most trusted men. Roose was at the center of the hall, speaking softly to a wounded rider who leaned heavily on one of the columns. Blood splattered the rider's cloak and the stone floor beneath him. Sansa smelled iron in the air. As soon as Sansa entered, Ramsay ushered her close. "Look at this," he said, in a voice that trembled with something akin to excitement. "Our scouts encountered a party of armed men trying to slip near Winterfell. They claim loyalty to Stannis Baratheon. They say he is not dead, as rumored, and that he is marching with a small force to contest our claim on the north." The words made Sansa's blood run cold. She remembered the War of the Five Kings, how Stannis had marched on the north after the defeat of Robb Stark, how rumors insisted that Stannis had died in the wake of the Battle of Ice. But rumors in the north were as treacherous as the cold. If he truly still lived, he might see this Bolton occupation of Winterfell as an affront, one to be corrected by steel. Roose stepped forward, his pale eyes flicking across Sansa's expression as though deciphering her reaction. "We must not allow Stannis to rally any of the North against us. Lady Sansa," he said, turning to her, "you have spoken of forging alliances, but if word spreads that another southern king seeks to unseat us, our tenuous allies may flock to him instead. We must project strength. We must make sure Stannis cannot claim Winterfell as his own." Sansa nodded, though internally her heart fluttered with 1,000 questions. Could Stannis hold the key to removing the Boltons from power? Was that not a better path to restoring Stark rule in the north? Yet she could not fully trust Stannis either. He had executed her brother-in-law Robb's supporters, refused to bend, brought much destruction in the name of his own claim. Moreover, if the Boltons suspected that Sansa secretly wanted to help Stannis, she would be doomed. Ramsay's gaze flicked between his father and Sansa. "We should march out to meet Stannis, crush him before he can gather more lords," he said in that fervent tone that reminded her of a dog straining at its leash. "If the Karstarks, the Umbers, the Manderleys, or any others see that Stannis has already lost, they will quell any thoughts of defiance." Roose stroked his chin. "You speak truth, my son, yet we must also protect Winterfell from infiltration or sabotage. Our men must be carefully distributed." Sansa took a step forward, her voice soft but earnest. "My lord, you should strike swiftly and decisively, but consider an alternative approach. If you send out riders to each of the major houses, urging them to remain loyal, offering them my official presence as Lady of Winterfell, they might think twice about following a southern invader. They would see that House Stark supports the Boltons, that I, Sansa Stark, do not side with Stannis." She forced herself to speak the words. A part of her cringed inside, but the plan was forming quickly in her mind. If they believed Sansa wholeheartedly opposed Stannis, that might help her keep the Boltons' trust. Meanwhile, the northern lords, who might still harbor loyalty to the Starks, would read between the lines. They might sense that Sansa was operating under duress. Or, if they believed she was sincere, they would wait until the dust settled. Either way, Sansa bought herself time to see what Stannis truly intended. Ramsay grinned at her. "You see, father, my wife has a head for these matters. We should do as she says. We put out the word that House Stark stands with House Bolton, unwavering, and any who stand with Stannis are traitors to the north." Roose inclined his head in that measured way. "Yes. Summon the scribes. We shall send ravens to every corner of the north." And so the die was cast. In the days that followed, as the ravens flew from Winterfell's rookery, Sansa composed the messages in her own handwriting, affixing her seal to each. Every stroke of ink on parchment felt like a small betrayal of her father's memory. Yet she told herself that she had chosen a path that would keep her alive long enough to reclaim Winterfell for her blood. The lines between truth and falsehood blurred in her mind, and she pressed the seal with trembling fingers. Littlefinger was nowhere to be found during these hectic days. Peter Baelish had slipped away from Winterfell quietly, claiming urgent business in the Vale. Sansa suspected he sensed the coming conflict and preferred to avoid being pinned beneath the avalanche of war. Or perhaps he was orchestrating a greater plot from afar. Regardless, she could rely only on herself. And if that meant she had to stand at the Boltons' side when they marched out to meet Stannis Baratheon, then so be it. Better to appear loyal to them now than to face their wrath alone in Winterfell. Her plan to accompany the Bolton forces solidified when Ramsay insisted she ride out with him, publicly acknowledging her place. "You will be at my side when I confront Stannis," he said with a feral glee in his voice. "The other lords will see the Stark girl stands with me, and it will make them quake in doubt before they ever dream of turning on us." So, on a bitter morning, with the wind howling like a dire wolf across the battlements, Sansa mounted a sturdy northern garron. She was bundled in furs from head to toe. The Bolton soldiers' ass, embled in columns, banners snapping in the gusts. Ramsay strutted at the head of the formation, clad in dark leathers. Roose rode calmly beside him, his expression as cold and distant as ever. The gates of Winterfell yawned open, and the column rode forth into the wide plain, heading south toward the King's Road. Sansa suppressed a shiver that was only partly due to the cold. This was it, the line between cunning and complicity. She rode alongside the men who had stolen her home, seeking to solidify their hold on it. Would the old gods ever forgive her for this? Their march was swift, but winter roads slowed travel even for hardened northerners. The route took them across snow-laden fields and frozen rivers, through passes that echoed with the howls of wolves. At each small holdfast they passed, the local folk peered out from behind shutters or gates, wary of the Bolton banners. But some recognized Sansa Stark's face or the direwolf sigil occasionally displayed at her side. Ramsay commanded that it be flown along with the flayed man, just to hammer home the alliance. It was a bitter symbol for Sansa to see the two sigils side by side, but she wore her mask of composure. At times, she and Ramsay would ride abreast, the snow crunching under hoof. He peppered her with questions about the region, about its harvests or potential fortifications. She answered patiently, offering bits of knowledge gleaned from her childhood. She was neither open nor hostile, simply polite, as if there had never been any question of her loyalty. She kept her darkest thoughts hidden behind her eyes. She knew Ramsay found it intriguing. He tried to provoke her on occasion, making sly comments about Theon or her dead siblings, but she let them pass with minimal reaction. Never let them see your anger, she remembered her mother once saying, let them see only your skill. At long last, they reached a vantage point near the ruins of an ancient watchtower. Scouts reported that Stannis was indeed in the region with a force smaller than the rumor had implied, perhaps battered remnants of an earlier defeat. The news spurred Ramsay's confidence. We'll crush them by nightfall, he boasted to Sansa, eyes alight. Then we'll take the few survivors as proof that no man, not even a self-proclaimed king, can claim the north without Bolton consent. Roose, however, was more cautious. He insisted on careful reconnaissance, measuring distances, ensuring that no northern houses lurked in the area ready to rally to Stannis. As Sansa observed them, she realized that father and son were two extremes, Ramsay brimming with savage energy, Roose exuding a chilling, methodical calm. Yet both were lethal in their own way. She walked among the men that evening, wearing a thick cloak, nodding and offering a kind word where she could. Most of the soldiers gave her a guarded respect, uncertain how to act around the Bolton bride who bore the name Stark. Some pitied her, some mistrusted her, but none dared speak openly. As darkness enveloped the camp, the Bolton sentries lit torches and set up a defensive perimeter. The wind seemed to carry the distant whinny of horses and the faint clank of metal. Stannis's men, presumably, were encamped elsewhere across the snowy plain. The night was so cold that frost formed on the edges of the tents. Sansa huddled near a small fire, alone with her thoughts. She glanced up at the vast emptiness of the northern sky, riddled with stars. She tried to find the patterns her father had taught her, but memories of Ned Stark burned too bright behind her eyes. Her father had always said, "Winter is coming." She felt that truth in her very bones. Just then, a Bolton scout came rushing through the rows of tents, breath visible in the cold. He nearly tripped over a tent peg before finding Ramsay, who was conferring with a cluster of officers. Sansa rose to her feet and drifted closer, ears straining to catch the frantic words. "Stannis's men," the scout panted. "They approach. A small group, perhaps a dozen. They bear no banners, but they're leading a supply train. Could be hoping to resupply or scout the area." Ramsay, brimming with eagerness, snatched his cloak from a soldier and strode forward. "Assemble a raiding party. I'll butcher them before they can blink." He glanced over at Sansa, and the grin that curled his lips made her stomach lurch. "Shall you watch your husband display his skill in battle, my sweet lady?" She swallowed and managed a nod. "If that pleases you, my lord." He laughed. "It does." Then he beckoned her to follow. "Armor for the lady. She rides with me." Moments later, Sansa found herself mounting a horse, wearing a half-breastplate hastily strapped over her thick cloak, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if others might hear it. This was no mere pageantry. She was riding into a skirmish. The small party set off at a gallop, leaving most of the Bolton forces in the camp behind. Ramsay was ever hungry for blood, unconcerned with caution. Roose had not emerged to stop him. Perhaps he thought a small raid might boost morale. Or perhaps he hoped to curb Ramsay's savage impulses by letting him sample victory on a smaller scale. They rode under the pale glimmer of moonlight, the hooves of their horses muffled by the thick snow. Sansa kept to the middle of the group, focusing on staying astride her mount. She had been taught to ride as a girl, of course, but not in conditions like these, nor with the threat of armed conflict hanging in the air. Ramsay led the vanguard, a few of his most vicious men flanking him. They crested a small ridge, and below, along the faint path, they spotted a column of men trudging through the snow, leading supply wagons. The Bolton riders wasted no time. At Ramsay's command, they charged. Sansa's throat constricted as she heard the clash of steel, the frightened shouts of men caught off guard. The first few moments were chaos. Ramsay's soldiers crashed into the column, felling 2 men with spears before they even drew swords. Ramsay himself circled around a wagon, letting out a high-pitched laugh as he swung his blade at a man struggling to unlimber a crossbow. Sansa clutched the reins, watching from the rear. Blood sprayed across the pristine snow. She felt a surge of nausea but forced herself to keep her eyes open. One of the supply wagons overturned, scattering sacks of grain and salted meats across the snow. The wounded cried out, and the Bolton men pressed forward with savage efficiency. Within moments, the skirmish was all but decided. Some of Stannis's men lay motionless, red seeping into the white ground. Others had fled, though a handful were run down quickly. Only a few were left to surrender, dropping their weapons in the churned snow. Ramsay dismounted to inspect them, panting from the exertion of the charge. Sansa, trembling, forced her horse forward. She could not appear weak before him. She needed to show that she could handle the brutality of the North. One of the captured men was kneeling in the snow, clutching a stab wound in his arm. He glared up at Ramsay with pure hatred. "You'll not break us," he snarled. "Stannis is the rightful king, and the North will never bow to you or your wretched father." Ramsay smiled as if he'd been complimented. "Is that so?" He turned to Sansa, who had pulled her horse to a stop a few paces away. "My lady, what shall we do with these fine fellows? Let them go with a warning." The men around them chuckled darkly, as if there was no possibility of leniency. Sansa fought down her horror. She recalled stories of how her father would sometimes spare captives who surrendered, but she also recalled that justice was harsh in the North for traitors, especially in times of war. She had to navigate this carefully. If she showed kindness, Ramsay might see it as weakness. She managed a steady tone. "They're traitors to your cause, my lord. You know what must be done." Her chest tightened as she said it, but she kept her voice impassive. A glimmer of approval flickered across Ramsay's face. "Yes, indeed." Without another word, he plunged his dagger into the wounded man's chest. The man's eyes bulged, then he collapsed into the snow. One of the Bolton soldiers did the same for the remaining captives. Sansa could do nothing but watch, grief and revulsion swirling beneath her calm facade. She reminded herself she was in a war. War offered little mercy, but it took all her will not to tremble. They returned to the camp victorious. Ramsay boasted of the easy slaughter, brandishing a gash on his forearm as a token of his skill in battle. The Bolton men cheered. Sansa dismounted in silence, her mind reeling. She slipped away to her tent, ignoring the celebratory jeers and laughter. She felt that she had crossed a terrible threshold. She had ordered no man's death explicitly, but she had offered no mercy. She had known what Ramsay would do. That night, she struggled to sleep, hearing the echoes of dying men in her dreams. But come morning, Ramsay was more enthralled with her than ever. He crowed to his father that Lady Sansa was cut from true northern cloth, that she did not blanch at the sight of Bolton justice. Roose merely nodded. Sansa saw in his eyes a glint of consideration, as if he was reevaluating her. Perhaps he realized that the timid girl they had coerced into marriage was gone, replaced by someone who understood the art of survival and the necessity of cruelty in a cutthroat world. If so, Sansa could use that. Word soon arrived that Stannis's main force was nearby, smaller than expected but dug in behind makeshift fortifications. Ramsay wanted to charge at once, but Roose counseled waiting for a more opportune moment to let the cold starve them out if they had no supplies. The tension in the camp grew thick. Sansa wandered among the soldiers, many of whom exchanged guarded words with her. Some recognized her as a Stark, and that still held a potent mystique in the North. Even if she stood with the Boltons, she was not exactly one of them. She sensed a subtle undercurrent. A handful of men might prefer her leadership to that of Ramsay's. But was that any comfort? Stannis's banners finally appeared on the horizon a few days later, black stag on a field of gold. Ramsay wasted no time spurring his cavalry forward. It was not a full battle, not yet, just skirmishes and feints. Stannis's men were exhausted, battered by the snow, but they fought with a fierce determination. Sansa watched from a ridge, flanked by guards, as swords flashed in the pale winter sun. She realized that if this fight ended in a swift victory for the Boltons, their position in the North would be all but unassailable. But if by some chance Stannis managed a victory or a stalemate, it might unravel the Boltons' grip, opening a door for some other northern banner, maybe the Umbers or Manderleys, to slip in and reclaim Winterfell in the name of the Starks. And what if that meant they'd sweep her aside as a Bolton collaborator? She grit her teeth. In that moment, she understood that the only path to the kind of power she needed was forging a truly formidable alliance with the Boltons. If she were to truly tip the balance of power in the North, she could not simply play at alliance. She had to embrace it to make certain the North recognized her as a leader in her own right, with the Boltons at her side whether they liked it or not. If that meant using deception or even violence to ensure the loyalty of the lesser houses, she had to be ready. The old Sansa would have cowered, but that girl had died 1,000 deaths in King's Landing. Now she would fight for Winterfell by any means. Back in the Bolton encampment that night, the men were sullen from a day's inconclusive skirmishes. Ramsay, as usual, licked his wounds by venting anger on underlings. He kicked a stable boy who was slow to bring his horse, snapping at him with all the cruelty of a man denied a real victory. Sansa, heart-pounding, stepped forward. "My lord, we all share your frustration," she said loud enough for the men nearby to hear. "But if we turn on our own, we show weakness. Show them your strength by leading, not by striking the helpless." Ramsay swung around, eyes blazing. For a moment, Sansa thought he would lash out at her. Then, to her relief, he forced a grin. "You have a peculiar way of speaking your mind, my lady. But perhaps you're right. I shall lead them into a glorious victory tomorrow." He put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Some men cheered, others exchanged glances. Sansa willed herself not to recoil from his touch. Later, in the privacy of the command tent, Sansa confronted him with measured defiance. "If we want these men to fight and die for us, we need to inspire them, not just frighten them." Ramsay stared at her, that manic light flickering in his eyes. "Fright is a potent motivator," he drawled. She lifted her chin. "But so is loyalty. And if we wish to hold the North, we might need that more than fear. They've lived under the Stark name for generations. Show them that name still holds meaning, your men will die for you gladly." He scoffed. "And how do you propose we do that? By hosting feasts and singing old songs?" A small smile touched her lips. "By forging an image of stability, tradition, and continuity. You have me, a Stark, beside you. Let the men see that we are united in purpose. Let them believe that, through me, House Stark's blessing rests on you. That might be enough to sway those still wavering." For a long moment, Ramsay said nothing. Then he laughed, the sound sharp as the crack of a whip. "I'll admit, you surprised me, dear wife. When you first arrived, I took you for a frightened bird. Now I see you have some steel in you." He narrowed his eyes. "Perhaps I like it." She offered a small, measured curtsy, her expression carefully neutral. Inside, however, her mind churned with plans. If she could persuade Ramsay, then maybe she could persuade the North at large. And once the North was persuaded, she would have the power to ensure the Boltons never held Winterfell against her will. The next day brought a larger conflict, with the Bolton forces arrayed against Stannis' men in open battle. Sansa stood behind the main lines, guarded by a pair of Bolton knights. Swords clashed, horses screamed, and the sky was filled with the hiss of arrows. She watched with grim determination as men died on both sides. The snow turned red where the fighting was fiercest. She saw glimpses of Stannis' banners, though the man himself was not in sight. Ramsay charged about on his war horse, rallying his archers to loose volley after volley. In the end, Stannis' line buckled under the weight of Bolton numbers and their cavalry advantage. Ramsay cut through their flank with savage joy, and pockets of Stannis' men scattered across the plain, some fleeing, some being run down. When the Boltons surged forward in a final onslaught, Sansa heard the crescendo of steel rise like a terrible storm. Then it was over. Stannis' surviving men fled toward the tree line. A handful surrendered. Word spread that Stannis himself had been struck down by an arrow and finished by a Bolton foot soldier. That effectively ended any immediate threat to the Bolton hold on the North. Standing at the edge of the battlefield afterward, Sansa stared at the broken bodies in the snow. She felt emptiness coil in her belly. The Bolton men cheered and raised their banners high, proclaiming a glorious victory. She saw Ramsay's triumphant grin from afar. She realized that, with Stannis gone, the Boltons would be unstoppable unless the Northern Lords aligned against them. And if she remained with the Boltons, the North might well bow, if only out of resignation. She wrestled with the question. Was that such a terrible thing if it meant the name Stark endured? Perhaps, in time, She could ease the Boltons' cruelty, bring about a more stable and just rule. But then she thought of all the betrayals and brutality they had committed. Would it really be justice for them to continue in power, even with a Stark at their side? The aftermath of the battle saw the Bolton forces returning to Winterfell in a triumphant parade. The gates opened wide, and the flayed man banner soared beside the direwolf. Though it made Sansa's stomach clench, she rode in at Ramsay's side. The people of Winterfell, those who had not fled or been cast out, lined the courtyard. Their expressions were guarded, but some gazes lingered on Sansa with a flicker of hope or confusion. She knew that rumors were swirling. Sansa Stark stood with the Boltons. She had reaffirmed it through her presence. She was not just a captive bride. She was actively aiding them. At the victory feast that night, the great hall rang with raucous music and laughter. Ramsay boasted of his triumph to any who would listen. Roose accepted quiet congratulations, sipping from a goblet of ale. Sansa sat near them, face calm, eyes drifting over the assembled lords. She heard bits of conversation. Talk of minor uprisings in the west, gossip about White Harbor's uncertain stance, fear about what the Lannisters might do now that the Boltons had effectively subdued the north. She took it all in. This was her realm, in a sense, her father's seat. Yet every corner felt draped in the Boltons' influence. Could she truly shape it to her own ends? Sometime around the middle of the feast, Roose rose and lifted his goblet, commanding attention. The hall fell silent. "Good men of the North," he intoned in that soft, chilling voice, "we gather to celebrate not only the defeat of a pretender, but the unbreakable union of House Bolton and House Stark. Winterfell stands strong, protected by both the flayed man and the direwolf." He turned to Sansa. "Lady Sansa, you are the last known heir to House Stark. In recognition of your loyalty to House Bolton and your commitment to the prosperity of the North, I propose we formalize your role as the rightful Lady of Winterfell. Let all here witness and acknowledge it." Sansa's heart thudded. She forced a graceful smile and stood. She could feel every eye upon her. She had to speak. She had to claim Winterfell in name, and with it, the stigma of collaborating with the Boltons. She inhaled slowly and let her gaze sweep the crowd. "It is my honor," she said, voice carrying, "to stand beside House Bolton to safeguard the North. My ancestors built this castle and kept it for generations. Now, with Lord Bolton, I pledge to preserve this legacy so that no southern pretender, king or otherwise, can threaten the North." Some in the hall cheered. Others remained quiet. She could see uncertain looks in the faces of a few lesser lords. But no one openly dissented. She was, indeed, forging the alliance she needed to survive. If the North recognized her authority in tandem with the Boltons, she could shape events from within. But even as she accepted the applause and lifted a goblet of her own, she felt a piercing regret. She was casting aside the fundamental notion of removing the Boltons entirely, at least for now. In the weeks that followed, Sansa took on more administrative duties at Winterfell. She oversaw the distribution of supplies to the surrounding villages, wrote letters to distant lords, attended to petitions from common folk seeking justice. To the small folk, it seemed that a Lady Stark had returned in earnest. Some ventured to say that the old ways might come back into practice, that Sansa would moderate the Boltons' cruelty. She tried to do so. If a farmer appealed for mercy regarding taxes, she would speak to Roose, urging leniency, couching it in practical terms. "Winter is coming, my lord. We cannot afford the people's starvation." Sometimes it worked, sometimes it did not. But bit by bit, she established a presence as a fair-minded leader, a voice that the North might someday rally behind. Ramsay tolerated her interventions for the most part. He seemed to find amusement in her attempts to soften his father's edicts. Every once in a while, though, he grew irritable. He'd snap at her in private, reminding her that he was the true warden's heir, that his word was law. She always deferred, letting him bask in the illusion of control. In truth, she was skillfully navigating each situation. She knew exactly when to push and when to withdraw. Still, news filtered in of quiet unrest among certain houses. The Umbers in particular were rumored to be displeased with the Boltons. White Harbor remained a question mark, though no open hostility had arisen. Sansa kept up correspondence with them all, forging a careful tone, warm but pragmatic, always hinting that House Stark had not forsaken its old alliances. She realized that if the Umbers or Manderleys openly rebelled, the Boltons would retaliate with lethal force. But if they bided their time until Sansa had sufficient backing to either reform or topple the Boltons, perhaps the North could be saved. But a dramatic shift occurred when the Karstarks, who had been steadfast in their support of the Boltons, announced a new arrangement with House Bolton, binding them closer. Lord Harold Karstark arrived at Winterfell with his retinue, kneeling before Roose and Ramsay, pledging further fealty. He brought with him a gift, the captive daughter of a small but proud mountain clan chieftain who had refused to swear allegiance. Ramsay had her locked away without a second thought. The sight made Sansa's stomach roil, yet again forced to confront the cruelty that came so naturally to her new allies. A private audience with Lord Harold Karstark followed. Sansa sat with Ramsay in the solar, a blazing fire crackling in the hearth. Lord Harold was thin-lipped with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He congratulated them on their victory over Stannis. A blow well struck, no doubt, he said. Yet rumors persist that the Vale might consider meddling if they see weakness in the north. They have a young lord, so I hear, and they're hungry for alliances. If they smell blood, they might send knights. Sansa kept her face composed. She knew the Vale well, had lived under Peter Baelish's manipulations there. But she had no desire to reveal the complexities of that connection. She parted her lips, prepared to respond diplomatically. Ramsay interjected first. Let them come. Their fancy knights in steel plate will find the North's cold and unforgiving foe. He flicked his gaze toward Sansa. Isn't that right, my lady? We showed Stannis how the North deals with southern ambitions. The Vale will fare no better. She nodded, though her mind raced. If the Vale forces did come, might that be the lifeline she needed? But that was speculation. She offered a noncommittal answer. Indeed, my lord husband. The mountains of the moon are treacherous, but the Vale has never confronted winter in the north. A wise commander knows not to underestimate the land itself as a weapon. Lord Harold nodded thoughtfully. Just so. I raise the matter because the Karstarks stand ready to march under Bolton command should any threat arise. It is crucial, however, that we maintain a united front. The Umbers, the Manderleys, these are potential fault lines. If they fracture away, the Vale might exploit that. He turned to Sansa, my lady, as the Stark presence in Winterfell, do you believe the Umbers or Manderleys would betray us? Sansa weighed her words carefully. She could not directly sow suspicion among the Boltons, but she also couldn't dismiss the possibility that those houses might indeed rebel. They're proud houses, known for their fierce loyalty to the Starks, she said with a measured tone. However, they have not openly defied us. If we extend them the courtesy and respect their due, they may remain loyal. But if we provoke them or appear too heavy-handed, they might be pushed to rash choices. I suggest a diplomatic overture reinforce that the Stark name supports this union in Winterfell. There is no cause to rebel if we share a common future. Lord Harold offered a small bow of acknowledgement. Sage counsel, Lady Sansa. He then eyed Ramsay. Lord Bolton, I hope you will consider my lady's wisdom. The Karstarks are willing to fight for you, but we do not wish to squander men on a war that might be avoided through cunning. As you proved in the war with Stannis, cunning is key to victory. Ramsay clicked his tongue, a slight smirk curling his mouth. My father and I will consider all counsel, he said, but rest assured, Lord Karstark, should war come, we shall meet it with steel and blood. No man shall question our right to the north. Sansa glanced at the hearth, watching embers crackle and spark. She wondered if that was how the north might burn, an ember igniting a storm of war. She could either help stoke it or quell it. Her choice would shape the fate of Winterfell and House Stark. Days passed, then weeks. The chill deepened. Snow piled high in the courtyard, drifting against the walls. From the ramparts, the fields glistened white as far as the eye could see. Messages arrived daily from various lords, some congratulating the Boltons on defeating Stannis, others murmuring about supplies for the winter. A few asked direct questions. Does Lady Sansa truly support the Boltons? Has the Stark line forsaken its old ways? She responded with carefully crafted missives aiming to keep tensions from boiling over. Now and then she caught glimpses of Theon wandering through the corridors. He looked more hollowed out than ever, but he seldom spoke. She gleaned that Ramsay still tormented him in private. She was uncertain how to help him without compromising her own position. Pity alone was not enough to risk unraveling everything she was trying to achieve. Yet her growing role in overseeing Winterfell's day-to-day affairs did yield unexpected benefits. She discovered that some staff, old stable hands, maids, cooks, had served the Starks for generations and silently yearned for a return to the old days. They trusted Sansa, if only because she bore that name. Some whispered that Bran and Rickon Stark had once lived, though many believed them dead. Others wondered if Jon Snow, rumored to be Ned Stark's bastard, might still dwell somewhere in the north. Hearing these rumors pricked Sansa's heart. She did not know Jon's fate, nor that of Bran or Rickon. She had to assume they were gone or beyond her reach. And so she walked alone in this uncertain new reality. A letter arrived from White Harbor that changed the game entirely. It was addressed to Lady Sansa Stark of Winterfell, but delivered through the Boltons. Ramsay read it first, of course, then passed it to her with a wry grin. She scanned the text. It was couched in polite terms, praising the union between Bolton and Stark, acknowledging their rightful wardenship of the North, but it also hinted at an invitation, a grand feast in White Harbor to cement ties, to celebrate the future prosperity of the North under the combined leadership of the new warden and his Stark bride. Ramsay's eyes glinted with dark amusement. They want us to come to them, to White Harbor. And they mention old ties to your family. Do you think it's a trap? Sansa considered. She knew Lord Wyman Manderley was rumored to be cunning and fiercely loyal to the memory of the Starks. He was also known for his capacity for subterfuge if threatened. It could be a trap, she said cautiously. Or it could be a genuine attempt to avoid conflict. The Manderleys are wealthy, they rely on trade and stability. They'd rather avoid a war that might disrupt their port. Perhaps they seek to reassure themselves that the new alliance is firm. Roose joined them, reading over Sansa's shoulder. If they wanted us dead, they could have simply withheld resources or allied with the Umbers in secret. This is an open invitation, quite public. It would be unwise for them to attempt an ambush when all the North's eyes are on us. Ramsay shrugged. Very well. Then we shall go. And if it is a trap, we'll make them regret it. And so preparations began for a journey to White Harbor, the proud port city that had so often played an integral role in the North's fortunes. Sansa recognized the importance. Publicly traveling there as Lady Bolton Stark would send a clear message that the North was expected to fall in line. It might also be a rare chance to meet with the Manderleys in person to glean their true intentions. Could she persuade them to bide their time until the moment was right to restore the Starks fully? Or was she in too deep already, now that she had openly supported the Boltons in battle and in governance? On the day they set out, Sansa dressed carefully in a gown of heavy dark blue wool trimmed with white fur, a discreet dire wolf brooch pinned at her shoulder. She rode in a covered carriage for part of the journey, mindful of the biting cold. Ramsay rode alongside her carriage at times, at other times galloping ahead with the vanguard. The trip took days. The roads were difficult and a light snow fell nearly every morning, turning the paths slick. But at last they saw the tall walls and watchtowers of White Harbor rising in the distance, the glint of sunlight reflecting off the frozen waters of the harbor. They entered the city in a procession of Bolton soldiers and Winterfell retainers, the banners of the flayed man and dire wolf side by side. The people of White Harbor lined the streets, some cheering politely, others merely watching in uneasy silence. Stone bridges arched across canals and tall houses loomed with steep roofs to shed the snow. Sansa watched from her carriage window, searching the crowd for any sign of hostility or hidden sympathy. All she saw were weary faces staring back. Lord Wyman Manderley greeted them at the gates of his keep, dressed in thick furs, his wide face wreathed in a carefully measured smile. "Welcome, Lord Bolton," he said in a booming voice. Then he turned to Sansa. "And to you, Lady Sansa, 1,000 welcomes. My city has ever been loyal to House Stark." Ramsay's grin stiffened slightly at that pointed statement, but Sansa merely inclined her head. "We're honored by your hospitality, Lord Manderley. I hope to see White Harbor thrive under our watchful stewardship." The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but she forced the polite smile. The next few days in White Harbor involved feasts, meetings with merchants, tours of the docks, all orchestrated to showcase the city's prosperity. Lord Manderley was an impeccable host, always ready with a toast or a jest. Yet behind his jovial manner, Sansa sensed a searching intelligence. He was watching Ramsay carefully, measuring every gesture and word. She wondered if he suspected how precarious the alliance truly was and if he was willing to risk open defiance in the near future. One evening, near the end of their visit, a grand banquet was held in the great hall of the Manderleys, replete with roast meats and strong ale. Musicians played lively tunes. Sansa sat beside Ramsay at the high table with Lord Wyman on her other side. Conversation drifted from trade agreements to the conditions of the main roads and the rumored pirate activity far to the south. Eventually, talk turned to the matter of the North's future. Lord Wyman spread his arms wide. "With Stannis defeated and the Boltons now firmly in control of Winterfell, I suppose all that remains is ensuring that no further pretenders arise. We cannot afford more chaos, not while winter sets in. Wouldn't you agree, Lord Bolton?" Ramsay lifted his goblet. "Wholeheartedly. The North will prosper once all the lords accept our rightful station." Wyman nodded slowly, eyes flicking to Sansa. "And I suppose, Lady Sansa, We owe this measure of peace to your presence, bridging the old ways of the Starks with the new ways of the Boltons." Sansa felt the weight of his words. She gave a small nod. "I endeavor to maintain peace in the north, my lord. That is all I have ever wanted, for my home to remain strong, united, and free from southern entanglements." Wyman's mouth curved in a tight smile. "A noble wish. I recall your father, Lord Eddard, always spoke of the North as a family, one that looks after its own." His tone held a subtle emphasis, as if reminding her that the Manderleys still considered themselves part of the Stark family. She managed a soft reply. "I remember, my lord." Ramsay missed none of the subtext. His fingers tightened on the stem of his goblet. Yes, the Starks were beloved once. But times change and the North moves on. Lord Eddard's memory does not pay the wages of soldiers, nor secure new trade routes. We do that with actions, not with memories. An awkward silence settled. Wyman smiled magnanimously and raised his goblet, changing the subject to toast their mutual prosperity. But Sansa knew that lines had been drawn, invisible but unmistakable. As the feast continued, she spoke little. She let Ramsay regale the crowd with tales of savage battles, while she exchanged subtle glances with Wyman. She sensed he was trying to discern if she truly supported the Boltons or if she was merely going along with them. She had to keep her mask in place, though part of her longed to say, "Wait, there will be a time. Stand ready." When the feast ended, the Bolton party retired to guest chambers in the Manderley Keep. Sansa lingered in a small sitting room, warming her hands at a brazier, lost in thought. She heard a soft scuffle outside the door, then a timid knock. Opening it, she found a young servant girl, perhaps no older than 14. The girl trembled slightly, glancing over her shoulder. "My lady, Lord Wyman asked me to deliver a message. He said, we remember. The North remembers. Have hope." She looked terrified. Sansa's breath caught in her throat. She recalled that phrase, "The North remembers," whispered by those who still held fast to the Stark cause. She felt a rush of emotion, but she maintained her composure. She nodded silently, slipped the girl a small coin, and dismissed her. "We remember." The words echoed in her mind. Perhaps all was not lost. Perhaps in time she could rally them or they would rally around her. But for now, she returned to her guest chamber, steeling her heart. She was riding home with the Boltons on the morrow, continuing this facade of loyalty. There was no turning back from this path. If the North truly remembered, and it recognized her as a power in Winterfell, then one day she would not stand at the Boltons' side as a mere pawn. She would stand above them, beyond them, leading the North as a true Stark should, driving out the flayed man banner for good. But that day was not yet. For the moment, she was forced to bide her time, weaving alliances behind the scenes, walking that razor edge between complicity and cunning. They departed White Harbor without incident. The roads were harder now, thick with drifts of snow. The journey took longer than before, but Ramsay's mood was buoyant. He believed the Manderleys had been cowed or swayed by displays of Bolton might. Roose, however, wore that same guarded expression, as if he suspected hidden machinations but had no immediate proof. Sansa let them believe what they wished. She was learning the art of illusions, a skill taught to her by harsh experience and tempered by her unwavering desire to survive. Upon returning to Winterfell, they found letters awaiting them, bearing news from across the north. One revealed that House Umber had gathered a host at Last Hearth, proclaiming it merely an extended training for their men. The Boltons viewed it with suspicion. Another letter from the Rills indicated that Lord Ryswell was sending men to bolster Winterfell's defenses, apparently in response to the rumor of raiders beyond the wall. And so the tapestry of alliances and tensions continued to shift. Sansa resumed her role in managing household affairs, presenting a united front with Ramsay, even as she plotted for the day she might cast him aside. Each new letter she wrote, each conversation with a minor lord, each gesture of sympathy or authority, was another thread in her web. The North might look upon her in confusion or fear now, but if she could hold out long enough, They would come to see her as a power in her own right, a beacon of stability in a land threatened by cruelty and chaos. In quiet moments, she thought of her mother and father, of Robb, of Arya and Bran and Rickon. She wondered how they might judge her choices. Would they call her traitor for aligning with the Boltons? Or would they recognize the lengths to which she'd gone in the name of House Stark's survival? She recalled how her father once said that when winter comes, you must protect those who look to you for leadership. Sansa hoped she was doing that in the only way she could. Time crept onward. The daily routine at Winterfell turned into a pattern of receiving visitors, hearing petitions, planning for the deeper snows to come. Ramsay's cruelty flared occasionally. He had prisoners flayed for minor offenses, or unleashed his hounds on some hapless souls. Each time, Sansa felt her resolve harden. She could not let the North remain in the hands of a monster. But an open move against him could cost her life, and any chance of saving Winterfell from within. So she wore her mask and waited. Bit by bit, she cultivated relationships with a handful of trusted servants and officers who had fond memories of the Starks. She learned which guard shift might look the other way if she needed to slip out, which maid could be trusted to relay a small message to the blacksmith in the village. She never spoke openly of rebellion or defiance. She only nurtured the idea that she was the true lady of Winterfell. She made certain those who yearned for a Stark and power felt seen and remembered. And with each passing day, the North's balance of power tipped further toward the Boltons and, through them, toward Sansa. For the lords who had once dreamed of an uprising or a southern rescue saw that no one was coming. With Stannis dead, the Lannisters embroiled in their own struggles in King's Landing and the Freys ensconced in the south, there seemed no immediate remedy for Bolton rule. Only White Harbor's quiet watchfulness and the Umber's potential for trouble hinted at future unrest. Still, the great irony was that while House Bolton tightened its grip, Sansa Stark's influence grew in parallel. She became the voice of reason, the beloved figure to whom even some Bolton men looked. It was she who oversaw the rationing of winter stores, who mediated local disputes, who wrote the letters promising fair dealings. In that sense, she and the Boltons had become symbiotic. Their cruelty and ambition overshadowed everything, while she offered a gentler face, a semblance of old northern honor. People wanted to believe in her. So they turned to her, and Ramsay found it convenient, at least for now, to allow her to handle those softer duties. Thus, the stage was set for a new era in the North. One in which a Stark wed to a Bolton held dominion, commanding both fear and reverence. Letters bearing the Stark dire wolf alongside the flayed man's sword across the wind-blown moors, proclaiming that House Stark had chosen to stand with House Bolton. The lesser lords, the small folk, the merchants, they recognized that the North was stable if not gentle, united if not merciful. Some believed that under Lady Sansa's guiding hand, the old ways might one day be restored. Others despaired that House Stark had forsaken them. But they all bent the knee, for what other choice was there? The North was vast, winter was long, and nowhere else offered more security than Winterfell, even under the new regime. The first real test of Sansa's delicate position came when an envoy from Bear Island arrived unexpectedly. Lady Lyanna Mormont, a fierce child by all accounts, had sent her maester and a small retinue bearing requests for trade in exchange for the island's famed warriors in any future conflicts. The maester was ushered into the great hall where Ramsay, Roose, and Sansa awaited. The maester bowed stiffly. "My lords, my lady. Bear Island sends its greetings." He spoke carefully, glancing from one to the other. "We have heard of your victory over Stannis, and we remain sworn to House Stark." He then hesitated, swallowing. "But we also know that House Bolton rules Winterfell. So we seek clarity. Under which banner does Bear Island fight?" Sansa spoke before Ramsay could respond. "Bear Island has ever been loyal to the North and to House Stark. While House Bolton serves as warden, we remain united under Winterfell. The Mormonts are a proud house known for their tenacity. We would be honored by your continued loyalty and friendship." The maester cleared his throat. "If Lady Sansa Stark assures it, perhaps we can reach agreeable terms. My Lady Mormont wishes to know whether you will guarantee Bear Island's autonomy. In return, she offers her warriors if the realm should face future dangers." A pointed look flickered toward Ramsay, as if to say, "We do not place unconditional trust in you, but we might in Sansa." Ramsay's smile was thin. He looked at Sansa, then at Roose. After a pause, Roose said, "We have no intention of threatening Bear Island. They are too far to cause trouble, and their fighting men are formidable." He turned to the maester. "Tell Lady Mormont that we gladly accept her offer of warriors should the need arise." In return, we pledge no interference with Bear Island's internal affairs. The maester bowed, but Sansa saw the subtle relief in his eyes. Again, she sensed it was her presence that made this possible. Perhaps Ramsay, left to his own devices, would have simply demanded fealty with an iron fist. But for the moment, the alliance with Bear Island was sealed and it bore her mark. She found herself alone in the Godwood afterward, kneeling at the base of the ancient weirwood tree. The red leaves stirred in a slight breeze and the face carved in the trunk seemed to weep sap. She closed her eyes. "Father, Mother," she whispered, "have I done right by you? Is this what I must do to keep our home safe?" She half expected silence, but in her heart she felt an echo. The North remembers. She rose, lips set in a thin line. Yes, the North remembers, and one day the North will rise. But that day would not be tomorrow. For now, she had to walk the path she had chosen, hard, perilous, and marked with decisions that stained her soul. Within a few moon turns, the alliances Sansa had fostered bore fruit. No major house openly rebelled. The roads, though perilous with snow, remained open for trade. White Harbor kept up a cordial correspondence. The Karstarks remained staunch allies. The Umbers, though sullen, did not take up arms. Bear Island reconnected with Winterfell through formal letters of greeting. Through it all, Sansa sat in the Great Hall, adjudicating disputes, issuing proclamations signed jointly by herself and whichever Bolton was present. Her role was now undeniable. She was not a captive. She was a partner, at least in appearance. The North perceived her as the unifying force behind the new Bolton ascendancy. Yet she felt emptier with each passing day. Every time Ramsay returned from a hunt with bloodied trophies, she forced a smile. Every time she heard screams from the dungeons, she looked away. She was no longer a helpless girl, but how far would she go to maintain her precarious hold on power? She told herself that once her position was unassailable, she could end the cruelty, or at least limit it. But each day that seemed more like a faint hope than a sure strategy. She took small comfort in the knowledge that some of the people in Winterfell believed in her. The staff, the stable boys, a handful of men-at-arms quietly shared stories of the old Stark days. She listened, nodded, hinted at the possibility of better times ahead. She never promised a revolt, never openly spoke of ousting the Boltons. But she kept the embers alive in their hearts. Perhaps that was all she could do for now. So the North's balance of power tipped, irrevocably shaped by the presence of Sansa Stark among the Boltons. What might once have been a region plunged into chaos by the arrival of these new, cruel wardens had instead become a tense but stable realm, one in which the old loyalties lingered beneath the surface, waiting for the day they could be revealed. And at the center of it all was Sansa, weaving alliances with a deftness that would have made her father proud, even as her methods might have pained him. For the North remembers, and Sansa Stark intended to make sure it never forgot whose seat Winterfell truly was. She only prayed she would not lose her soul in the process. In the months that followed, the snows grew deeper, the nights longer. Sansa presided over midwinter festivities, doing her best to preserve the ancient traditions. The lighting of lanterns to represent the return of the sun, the distribution of extra food to the poorest villagers. Ramsay barely tolerated these customs, but he let Sansa indulge the small folk. The result was a slight softening of the atmosphere in Winterfell, a faint echo of how things had once been. The people thanked her in hushed tones, calling her Lady Stark, whenever they felt the watchful gaze of Bolton soldiers was absent. Meanwhile, the roads between the great northern houses stayed open for trade if lightly traveled and no armies marched. The North was at peace, albeit a peace underpinned by fear. Yet Sansa felt a gathering tension in the air as though the land itself was holding its breath. She saw the way certain lords eyed Ramsay at feasts, how certain travelers from the west or from the rills paused before they knelt, as if entertaining other possibilities. She sensed that the slightest spark could ignite a rebellion. Whether that spark came from the Umbers, from White Harbor, or even from within Winterfell itself, she could not say. Yet Sansa had become adept at dousing sparks. With each challenge that emerged, she found a path to compromise or conciliation. She stepped in when Ramsay threatened to strip a minor lord of his lands over a perceived insult, persuading him to accept a public apology instead. She mediated a dispute between House Serwyn and House Tallheart over a contested mill. In so doing, she strengthened her own standing. Now, in the eyes of many, it was Lady Sansa who truly governed the North, with the Boltons merely providing the muscle to back her. This was a delicate fiction, but one that seemed to grow more potent with each passing day. At times, she marveled at how far she had come from the frightened girl in King's Landing. She had learned the art of subtlety, of forging alliances one careful conversation at a time. She had learned to keep her true feelings locked behind a mask, revealing only what was necessary to preserve her influence. It was a lonely existence, for she could trust no one fully. Not Roose, not Ramsay, not even the staff who whispered of Stark loyalty. Any one of them could betray her if they caught the faintest whiff of sedition. So she walked the corridors of Winterfell like a specter, simultaneously revered and feared, the embodiment of a future the North could only guess at. Some nights, she imagined what it would be like to declare open rebellion, to rally the lords loyal to House Stark and chase the Boltons from Winterfell, avenging her slain family. But the image of a battlefield littered with corpses, of Ramsay unleashing his savage fury on anyone who dared defy him, stayed her hand. The cost would be enormous, and victory was not guaranteed. If she miscalculated, the Boltons would butcher her allies, flay them alive. The kingdom would sink deeper into terror, and House Stark might die forever. So she waited, honing her strength in the shadows. Word occasionally reached them from the south, rumors of turmoil in King's Landing, talk of dragons across the sea, murmurs that the Night's Watch was troubled by wildlings and worse beyond the Wall. Sansa listened, but these matters felt distant. The North was its own kingdom in all but name, a realm shaped by winter and the memory of the old kings. She did wonder about Jon Snow sometimes, rumored to have joined the Night's Watch. But if he still lived, he was beyond her reach, and she could not rely on him to rescue her. Eventually, the North settled into a steady rhythm. By the time the harshest months of winter arrived, Sansa's position was secure. Lords came to Winterfell to pledge renewed fealty or seek counsel, and they found her presence reassuring. Ramsay boasted of the realm's unity, claiming it all a testament to the Bolton rule. Roose, ever watchful, sometimes studied Sansa with those pale eyes, as if trying to discern her endgame. But he said nothing. Perhaps he believed that she was simply adjusting to the new realities, that she had no illusions of overthrowing them. Perhaps he thought that the power she wielded, subtly but unmistakably, was enough to keep her content. That in time she would become a true Bolton in heart as well as name. He did not know the steel core of her resolve. He did not hear her silent prayers in the Godswood, nor see the faint, coded letters she dispatched under the guise of official business, quietly maintaining relationships with houses that still believed in the Stark cause. She was in this now for the long haul. She had joined the Boltons, yes, in order to survive. But she had also done it to reclaim Winterfell in her own way, on her own terms. If that meant wearing the flayed man's banner beside the dire wolf for a while, so be it. The North would remember, one day it would also rise. And when it did, Sansa Stark would be ready. In this way, Sansa Stark, the young wolf maiden once scorned as naive, had become the power behind the Bolton throne. And by doing so, she had changed the very fabric of the North. The howling winter winds carried whispers of her name across the moors and over the frosted hills. Some spoke it with hope, others with resentment or awe, but no one denied her influence. If the Boltons' rule was the iron fist, she was the silk glove, but a glove with claws hidden in its lining. And thus the North's balance of power tipped not into open war nor subjugation, but into a realm that bore the dread sign of House Bolton, even as it took its cues from the last known daughter of House Stark. It was a compromise few would have predicted, one fraught with moral quandaries and uneasy alliances. Yet in the frozen heart of Winterfell, Sansa wielded a quiet, simmering authority, waiting for the moment when the illusions fell away and the true re-emergence of House Stark could begin. Until that day came, she would play the part of the dutiful Bolton bride, co-ruler of the North, ensuring that no one, be it southern invader or rebellious bannerman, unseated her from her rightful place. She would endure Ramsay's savagery and Roose's chill for as long as it took. Because in her heart of hearts, she knew that winter was coming and the North would need a Stark to guide them through it. And if the price was the stain of complicity, the taste of blood on her tongue, then so be it. She had learned that, in a world of cruelty, sometimes you had to join the monsters to one day slay them. So she knelt before the heart tree in the Godswood, closing her eyes as the wind whispered through the branches. She felt the faintest flicker of warmth against her cheek, as if the gods themselves offered a small benediction. Her father's face rose in her memory, calm and stern. She bowed her head. "I am sorry," she whispered, "for the things I've done, but I will not surrender our home. Not ever." The weirwood branches stirred, and she imagined she heard an echo. We remember. The North remembers. Sansa Stark stood, letting the swirl of snow settle around her boots. She exited the Godswood and returned to the halls where Ramsay waited, carrying with her the quiet, unbreakable knowledge that this was her duty, her destiny, and she would see it through to the bitter end. Sansa Stark stood on the ramparts of Winterfell once more, gazing over a courtyard blanketed by fresh fallen snow. The pale afternoon light gave the walls and towers a ghostly cast, as though the ancient stones carried secrets in their marrow. Though the winds still cut like knives, she'd grown accustomed to the cold, embracing the North's harshness as part of herself. Each day she felt as though she were carved out of the same stone beneath her feet, enduring, unyielding, changed forever by all she had seen and done. But the chill she felt now was not only winter's breath. It was the chill of knowing that every passing day tightened House Bolton's hold on the North, and deepened her complicity in that hold. Below, the courtyard churned with activity, if more subdued than in summers past. Bolton guards patrolled the perimeter. Servants lugged sacks of grain toward storerooms. Dogs barked in distant kennels. She recognized the harsh cry of one of Ramsay's hounds, the same savage beast he let roam the corridors to keep everyone tense. Winterfell felt both familiar and alien, her home, yet scarred by banners of flayed men and the presence of those who had murdered her brother and usurped her father's seat. Yet she, Sansa Stark, was now Lady of Winterfell in the eyes of the realm. Perhaps that was all that mattered. Appearances, perception, power. As she stared at the flurry of movement, she thought back to the precarious alliances she had labored to sustain since the defeat of Stannis Baratheon. A Bolton triumph had followed, cementing them as wardens of the North, and Sansa had thrown herself into maintaining peace through measured words and quiet diplomacy. The great houses, Karstark, Manderley, Serwyn, Tallhart, Ryswell, Glover, had all been made to understand that the Stark name still watched over them, albeit conjoined with the Bolton sigil. Publicly, Sansa and Ramsay presented a united front, and it had worked. No open rebellions had flared, no southern armies had marched, and the Vale had thus far kept its distance. She did not know if that distance was a blessing or a curse. Perhaps Peter Baelish still schemed somewhere, biding his time. She had learned from Peter's example that patience could be more potent than brute force. She sighed and turned away from the ramparts, heading back along the wall walk. She wore a thick cloak trimmed with white fur, pinned at the shoulder by a small dire wolf brooch. A Bolton guard bowed his head respectfully as she passed, stepping aside. That too was part of her new world. Men in flayed man livery treated her with deference because, through marriage, she was one of them, yet all the while they whispered behind her back that she was a Stark in name, that her loyalties might lie elsewhere. She had grown deft at letting them wonder, letting them remain uncertain whether she was a true ally or a dangerous traitor. That uncertainty was her greatest shield. Descending the spiral steps, she entered the keep. The corridor walls were lit with torches that sputtered in the cold draft. She could not help recalling how different Winterfell had been when she was a child. Then it had always seemed warm, even in the darkest winters. The hearths had blazed, laughter and music had filled the halls. Now Winterfell's warmth felt forced, uncertain, overshadowed by fear. Even so, Sansa was determined to re-establish as many of the old customs as she could, if only to preserve a shred of what the castle once represented. She oversaw the distribution of food to the small folk and insisted that local disputes be heard in open court as her father would have done. She enforced her will subtly, offering reason and fairness rather than threats. Some men still flinched when she delivered her rulings, as if expecting to see the savage face of Ramsay behind her. But that was not her way. It never would be. She came to a modest wooden door and pushed inside, finding her old bedchamber far from the one she'd used as a girl because that had been too full of memories and, besides, the Boltons had claimed most of the comfortable suites for themselves. A small brazier glowed in the corner, barely taking the sting out of the air. A servant girl stood near the bed, folding fresh linens. The girl curtsied. Sansa recognized her as one who had served the Starks in her grandmother's day, a quiet presence who still remembered. Sansa moved to her desk and sat, rubbing her arms to dispel the cold. On the desk lay a stack of letters, petitions, messages from lords, supply inventories. She leafed through them, her mind a swirl of half-formed strategies. One letter caught her eye, a raven from House Glover. She had not heard from them in some weeks, though they'd sent an envoy once, a stern-faced man who said little about their intentions. She broke the seal and read. The letter was brief, couched in polite terms, but it carried an undercurrent of urgency. Lord Galbart Glover wrote that his people were struggling with the heavier snows and needed assistance with shipments of grain from the south. The letter ended with a careful phrase. We trust that Lady Sansa Stark and her noble husband will recognize House Glover's loyalty, as proven in wars past, and see fit to strengthen our bonds in these uncertain times. Sansa read the words twice, sensing that Lord Glover was testing the waters, uncertain whether to trust fully in the Bolton-Stark union. Indeed, many houses were waiting, watching, unsure if the Boltons would hold the North for good, or if some other power might soon emerge. She dipped her quill in ink and composed a measured reply, offering to expedite grain shipments from White Harbor, promising Winterfell's support. She made certain to add a sentence about how House Glover's long-standing devotion to House Stark was known and valued. Those were the words that truly mattered, the words that might remind him she was still a Stark at heart. Then she folded the letter, poured wax, and pressed the direwolf seal that Ramsay had insisted she use alongside the flayed man. The dual seal was a symbol of how deeply their houses were now entwined, for better or for worse. When she had finished, she glanced at the other letters. Some were routine requests for justice, others from smaller holdfasts reporting bandits or wolf attacks. She sighed. She would answer them all. Once, this sort of mundane governance had been her father's domain, or Maester Luwin's. But now she held that responsibility. It gave her a sense of purpose to see the northern lords and small folk looking to her for answers, even if their submission was tinged with fear of the Boltons. A faint rap on her door startled her. She called for whoever stood outside to enter, bracing herself for a guard or a summons from Ramsay. Instead, it was Maester Tybalt, a stooped man with wispy gray hair who had replaced Maester Luwin after the Iron Men attacked Winterfell. Tybalt bowed his head deeply. "My lady," he said in a soft voice, "I bring news from the gates. A small party has arrived, escorted by some Bolton riders. They bear the sigil of House Ryswell. They come under a peace banner, but it seems they bring more than a simple courtesy visit. They've arrived with a carriage, and from what the guards say, it holds a woman of some significance. Lord Ramsay requests your presence in the Great Hall." Sansa's heart fluttered with a sudden rush of concern. The Ryswells were distant kin to the Boltons through marriage and had a holdfast not too far from the Rills. She knew they had been among those who quickly bent the knee after the Red Wedding, forging ties with the Boltons for safety. But why bring a mysterious woman to Winterfell in the dead of winter? She guessed it might be some political gambit, an arranged match for a cousin, or an attempt to curry favor. In the North, alliances and marriages were currency almost as valuable as steel and food. She rose, smoothing her gown. "Thank you, Maester. I will go at once. Have you any notion as to who the lady might be?" He shook his head. "No, my lady. The guards only said she was heavily cloaked and that the Ryswell party seemed tense. Lord Ramsay awaits you in the Great Hall now." With that, Sansa dismissed him and hurried out. Her boots tapped against the cold stone floors as she made her way through corridors lit by flickering torches. She could feel an uneasy knot forming in her stomach. Surprises always came with risk in Winterfell these days. She recalled how her mother, Catelyn, had once told her that the best armor for the game of lords and ladies was knowledge. But the North was full of secrets now, and knowledge was not so easily gained. At last, she reached the Great Hall. The huge double doors stood open, revealing a gathering of Bolton guards, a cluster of Ryswell soldiers, and at their center, Ramsay Bolton himself, seated in his father's high seat. Roose was nowhere to be seen. He seldom greeted visitors with pomp. Ramsay, however, relished such displays. He lounged, wearing a smirk as wide as the winter sky, as if daring the newcomers to amuse him. Sansa approached, chin lifted. "My lord," she said formally, inclining her head to Ramsay. Then, turning to the visitors, she added, "Welcome to Winterfell. I am Lady Sansa. May I know your purpose?" Her voice was steady, controlled. The Ryswell party parted to reveal a tall man who bore the look of authority. This must be Rickard Ryswell, the head of their house. He wore a heavy cloak of dark brown fur and looked as though he had spent many days riding in bitter cold. He bowed stiffly. "My lady, my lord," he said, nodding at them both, "I come from the Rills with my daughter, Barbary. We were traveling south on urgent business before winter makes the roads impassable. Yet we were attacked by brigands not a day's ride from here. We suffered losses. I seek refuge within Winterfell's walls for a short span so we might recover and continue our journey. I have also come to pay respects to our warden and his noble lady." Ramsay studied him with a cat-like grin. "Brigands? In my territory? How dare they?" He let out a cold little laugh. "Tell me, Lord Ryswell, these brigands, how many? Armed how? Did you lose men?" He asked his questions with the slow relish of a predator circling prey. Lord Ryswell's jaw flexed. "We lost 3 men at arms, my lord. The attackers wore no heraldry, but they were well armed. Mercenaries, perhaps, or sellswards come north in search of plunder. I cannot say for certain, but my daughter was much distressed by the ordeal." He raised a hand, beckoning someone forward. A figure moved from behind a guard, cloaked in gray. A swirl of fur obscured the face until slender, gloved hands pushed the hood aside. Sansa saw a young woman, perhaps no older than herself, with long brown hair and a stoic cast to her features. Her eyes looked haunted, as if she had seen the edge of a blade too closely. Ramsay regarded her for a moment. "My lady, I trust your father has told you how Winterfell has changed hands?" His voice held that false courtesy that made Sansa's skin crawl. The young woman nodded mutely, trying to keep her composure. "Then consider yourself a welcome guest." He gestured expansively. "You shall have a room, warm meals, anything you need. We'll see your men seen to as well." Sansa took a step forward. "Lady Barbary, you are welcome here, in the name of House Stark and House Bolton both. I'm sorry for what you endured on the road. We will do what we can to find those who attacked you." Lady Barbary's eyes flicked to Sansa, searching for sincerity. After a long beat, she inclined her head. "Thank you, my lady. Your kindness is appreciated." Something about her voice, the tightness in her posture, told Sansa she was holding back. Perhaps the ambush had shaken her, or perhaps there was more to this journey than a simple trip south. But Sansa reminded herself that she had to be cautious. Everyone who came to Winterfell carried secrets these days. She beckoned a steward. "See that our guests are taken to the West Wing and made comfortable. Have the maester check their wounds. Provide a hot meal at once. We'll speak more tomorrow, Lord Ryswell, Lady Barbary." Lord Ryswell thanked her with a curt bow, still eyeing Ramsay warily. At a gesture from Ramsay's men, the Ryswell party followed the steward out of the hall, leaving only a small knot of Bolton guards in their wake. Once they had gone, Sansa turned to Ramsay, bracing for whatever comment he'd unleash. He tapped a finger on the arm of the chair. "Interesting, don't you think? Ryswell claims brigands. Well-armed mercenaries in the north in winter. Doesn't that strike you as odd?" He looked to her expectantly. She kept her tone measured. "Not many sellswards venture this far north in such weather. But times are strange. With the wars in the south, men roam everywhere for plunder." Ramsay's grin widened. "Yes, or perhaps they came here for a more particular purpose. We'll see if the Ryswells know more than they admit." He leaned forward. "In the meantime, my dear wife, see if you can coax that girl into telling you the truth. Sometimes a bit of warmth and sympathy will loosen a tongue better than a flaying knife." He laughed at his own jest, though Sansa did not find it funny. She inclined her head. "I will do what I can. If there is some threat in the region, we should know." He stood, crossing to her in a few long strides, placing a hand on her arm. She fought not to recoil. "Yes," he purred, leaning in, "I do value your clever mind, Sansa. So see that you use it." Then, with that unsettling closeness, he turned and strode away, the guards trailing behind. Sansa waited until the echo of his boots faded before letting out a slow, trembling breath. The next day, as promised, she called upon the Ryswells in their assigned rooms, accompanied by 2 serving women bearing trays of food and mulled wine. Lord Rickard Ryswell was not present when she arrived. Apparently he had gone to speak with Roose about security for his onward travels, but Lady Barbary was there, sitting by the small fireplace with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. One of her maids, a mousy girl with anxious eyes, hovered nearby, uncertain of her place. Sansa gave a polite smile as she entered. "Lady Barbary, I trust you rested well?" Barbary rose and attempted something like a curtsy, though it was awkward. She seemed unused to formalities. Her face was pale, her eyes circled by shadows. "My Lady Sansa, you honor us." "Yes, we are grateful for the shelter." Sansa had the serving women place the trays on a small table, a steaming bowl of oat porridge, fresh bread, a pot of mulled wine. "There," she said kindly. "Please, help yourself. I remember your father from my childhood. He would sometimes visit when my family held banquets. I was quite small, but I recall him as a steadfast bannerman of my father. That was a different time, though." Barbary's lips twitched as if stifling emotion. A very different time, indeed. A silence hung between them, thick with all the horrors that had happened since. Sansa studied Barbary's features. She seemed haunted, yes, but also guarded. Sansa decided to take the gentler approach Ramsay had mockingly suggested. I'm truly sorry for the losses you suffered on the road, my lady. If there is anything you can tell me about those who attacked you, why they might be in the north, or if they said anything, we can try to catch them. Barbary stared at the fire for a long moment. Her maid slid into a corner, trying to be inconspicuous. Eventually, Barbary said they wore thick cloaks of mottled gray and brown. Their leader spoke with a strange accent. Not quite northern, but not southern either. Perhaps he was from the Riverlands. I cannot be sure. They took our coin, tore through our supplies, and demanded we relinquish something we did not have. Sansa tilted her head. What did they want? Barbary exhaled. They demanded we hand over. The girl from the Rills. She gave a shaky laugh. Which was me. My father refused, of course. They attacked and we fought back. We managed to kill a few, but their swords were better and we lost good men. Then they fled. They never explained who sent them. Sansa's mind churned. Why target Barbary specifically? She was not known to be a great heiress. True, the Riswells had some standing, but it seemed odd to abduct or kill her unless there was a personal vendetta or a deeper plot at play. Did they hint at a ransom? Barbary shook her head. No. They kept saying we're owed a debt. We collect tonight. It made no sense to me. My father heard it too. A debt. Perhaps someone told them we carried gold or that House Riswell had slighted them. But to chase us in winter so deep in the north, it's madness. Sansa suppressed a frown. I see. Well, we'll have the Bolton men search nearby roads. If they're still out there, we may find them. We cannot have armed brigands roaming so close to Winterfell. Barbary regarded her carefully. I hope you do, she said softly, but I suspect they've gone. And if they return, I can only pray we have your protection. Sansa nodded. You do, she said, though the words tasted bitter. It meant relying on the Boltons, and she knew full well the cost of that reliance. Winterfell is your safe haven for as long as you need it. Over the next days, Sansa's attention was divided between the usual tasks, arranging supply routes for House Glover, mediating a dispute among the Cerwyns, dealing with Ramsay's frequent demands for hunts or amusements, and trying to puzzle out the Riswell situation. Lord Rickard and his daughter lingered, waiting for clearer roads to continue south. The more Sansa spoke with them, the more she sensed they were not entirely truthful about their destination. Barbary sometimes hinted they were going to White Harbor or possibly even to the Neck, but her stories changed, never quite aligning. Sansa wondered if they were seeking refuge for a more pressing reason. Were they fleeing an arranged marriage? Smuggling a secret message? She observed how they avoided Roose Bolton's eyes when they encountered him in the corridor, how Lord Riswell made polite small talk about the realm but never asked direct questions about Winterfell's governance. Late one evening, as Sansa walked alone through the second-floor gallery, she heard hushed voices echoing from the shadows near a corner stairwell. She stepped carefully, pressing herself against the stone, listening. The voices were those of Lord Riswell and his daughter. Barbary sounded upset. Father, I cannot do this, she was saying. It's too dangerous. If they learn. Lord Riswell shushed her. We have no choice, child. We must wait for an opening. We've come too far to turn back. Barbary's tone rose slightly, quavering. They'll kill us if they suspect. The flayed man does not spare traitors. But we aren't traitors, he hissed back. We seek the true cause. The North remembers. That is not treachery. A pause. Stay calm. If we must remain a fortnight, we will. Let them believe we're shaken from the attack. Then their voices fell to urgent whispers. Sansa strained her ears, but she could glean no more before they parted ways down the stairs. She remained there for several heartbeats, her pulse racing. The North remembers. They had used that phrase. A phrase that had come to symbolize quiet loyalty to House Stark, whispered by those who opposed the Boltons. The words brought a surge of adrenaline. So Lord Riswell and his daughter were perhaps allied with some clandestine movement or waiting for the right moment to act. Could they be part of a plan to spark rebellion? Or were they simply trying to survive? She returned to her chamber in a daze. If the Riswells were here to plot with Sansa, if they assumed she was truly a Stark beneath her Bolton mantle, they had not approached her directly. Likely they feared discovery. But perhaps they intended to contact White Harbor or the Umbers or whomever might stand against the Boltons. Sansa felt torn. She wished with every fiber of her being that she could openly unite with them, gather the discontent lords, and throw off the flayed man's tyranny. Yet she knew that a rash move could doom them all. Ramsay and Roose would respond with brutality. The North was not ready for an uprising, not unless some larger force supported it. But as far as she knew, no such force existed. The South was in chaos, the Vale had done nothing. so she had to remain cautious, especially while the Riswells were here. In the following days, Sansa watched the Riswells closely. She noticed how Barbary sometimes studied her from across the Great Hall as if wrestling with a decision. Lord Riswell took pains to flatter Ramsay with idle talk of hunts, telling tales about boars and wolves near the rills, entertaining him with possible new places to set his hounds loose. Ramsay, in turn, preened under the attention, seemingly convinced the Riswells were no threat. But Sansa saw the tension in Rickard Riswell's eyes whenever Ramsay crowed about his success in subduing the north. In quiet moments, Sansa considered approaching Barbary privately. She found pretexts to visit the Riswell quarters, asking if they were comfortable, inquiring about their wounded men, but Lady Barbary remained guarded. She thanked Sansa for her kindness but volunteered little. Her father was even more circumspect. Sansa realized they might be waiting for a sign from her or for a meeting free from prying ears. So she decided to create such an opportunity. With winter tightening its grip, each day was shorter, the nights black and cold. Sansa planned a small gathering one evening in the solar adjacent to the library, an informal event, she called it, to let the visitors from the Rills mingle with a handful of Winterfell retainers. She kept the guest list short and left Ramsay out of it by claiming it was only for lesser courtiers. Ramsay, bored by the idea of a dull social function with no chance of violence, waved her off with a sneer, telling her to amuse herself as she liked. Roose did not bother to attend. That was perfect. It gave Sansa free rein to observe the Riswells without the Boltons looming. She arranged for mulled wine, warm bread, salted pork, and spiced apples. A small fire crackled in the hearth and candles lit the shelves. Half a dozen people attended, 2 Castellan aides, a pair of maids, and 1 traveling scribe who had come from a nearby holdfast to deliver accounts. The Riswells arrived in modest attire, making polite greetings. For a while, conversation drifted to mundane topics, the frigid weather, supply routes, old stories of battles along the Barrowlands. Yet Sansa noticed how Lord Rickard seemed restless, scanning the room as if searching for eavesdroppers. Barbary sipped her wine and murmured small talk. At length, Sansa dismissed the others to the far side of the solar, encouraging them to enjoy the refreshments. She drifted closer to Barbary, who stood by a bookshelf, fingering the spine of a worn tome about the kings of winter. Sansa glanced around to ensure no one hovered within earshot. Then she spoke softly but with purpose. "I overheard you and your father in the corridor the other night." She saw Barbary stiffen, eyes going wide. "You spoke of the North remembering. You needn't fear me. I don't intend to betray you." She lowered her voice further. "But I'd like to know your purpose here." For a moment, Barbary's face was all shock and alarm. Then she let out a shaky exhale and managed to steady herself. "My lady, we were not here to cause trouble." She swallowed. "My father is a proud man. He detests what has happened to the North since the Red Wedding. We all do. Yet we can't openly oppose the Boltons. We have no army to match them, no backing from any southern power. So we've had to bow to bide our time. But there are rumors of new stirrings, talk of possible alliances forming beyond the neck. We were traveling to learn more." Sansa glanced toward Lord Rickard, who was conversing politely with the scribe by the hearth. "Alliances with whom?" she asked. Barbary shook her head. "I'm not entirely sure. Father has been cryptic. I only know that he believes certain lords in the Riverlands or possibly the Vale might help us, men still loyal to the memory of King Robb or to House Stark. There are also whispers that a Targaryen has returned in the east, that dragons might again soar across Westeros. If a war ignites to unseat the Lannisters, the Boltons could face new enemies. And if that day comes, Father wants to see the North united under a Stark once more." Her tone was fierce, but her face betrayed fear. "He insisted we go south to learn the truth, but we were attacked before we made it far." Sansa felt her heart flutter. So House Riswell was searching for a spark, a chance to restore the Starks. They were not the only ones. The Manderleys, the Umbers, perhaps even smaller houses held the same hope. But it was all so uncertain. "Your father must know that an open rebellion now would be suicide," she said quietly. "The Boltons are strong here, and none in the south are poised to save us." Even the Vale remained silent. Barbary's voice quivered. "Yes, that's why we proceed in secret. But we do not want to lose hope. My father believes that if a southern invasion happens, by Targaryen forces or by any power that topples the Lannisters, it will weaken the Boltons. Then we might stand if the realm is in chaos." She let out a long breath. "I'm sorry, my lady. I know you must walk a precarious path, married to that monster. But we see you as our only beacon. If you were gone, no true Stark remains to rally around." Sansa swallowed hard. Her mind reeled with the potential implications, outside forces toppling the Lannisters, perhaps igniting new conflicts in the north. Was that truly the best hope? More bloodshed, more war? But she could not deny that as long as the Boltons sat unchallenged, the north would remain under their grip. "I understand," she said softly, "and I won't hinder you. But be careful. Ramsay is cunning, and so is Roose. If they suspect your true aims, they will destroy you, flay you all without hesitation." Barbri's lips pressed thin. "We know the risk. We only ask that if you see a chance, any chance, you remember that House Stark is not forgotten. That we stand ready to rally when the moment is right." Sansa nodded, the weight of it pressing upon her like a block of ice. "I will remember." She paused. "But for now, you must seem content to depart Winterfell without incident. If you linger too long, Ramsay will grow suspicious." Before Barbary could answer, they heard footfalls approaching. Lord Rickard came toward them, a polite smile fixed to his face. His eyes flicked between them, reading the hush in the air. Sansa offered a cool nod. "Lord Ryswell," she said, raising her voice to a normal pitch, "I hope your wounds are healing. You'll find the road safer if you travel with an escort from Winterfell. I'll see that it's arranged, if you wish." He inclined his head. "You are most gracious, my lady. That would ease our journey greatly." And so the conversation ended, but the understanding had been forged. Sansa felt a trembling excitement underneath her calm exterior. She was not alone in yearning to unseat the Boltons, but any open action was fraught with peril. For now, subtlety remained her ally, just as it had been since the day she returned to Winterfell under Peter Baelish's guidance. She had learned well how to wear a mask. She only hoped it would not swallow her whole. Soon after that gathering, the Ryswells announced their intention to depart. Ramsay, perhaps suspecting nothing beyond their fear of being ambushed again, agreed to provide a small escort of Bolton guards. If he'd known the truth, Sansa suspected those guards would have had orders to put knives in their backs. But Ramsay had been distracted by a new cruelty. He'd captured a handful of men on the King's Road, claiming they were deserters or bandits. It was likely they were nothing more than unfortunate travelers. Either way, he intended to flay them to make an example. Sansa learned of it only in passing. It churned her stomach, but there was little she could do besides entreat him to show mercy, requests he ignored. She told herself that one day, she would ensure no such atrocities took place in her home. Until then, she had to maintain her delicate dance. The morning the Ryswells left, Sansa bid them farewell in the courtyard. She stood alongside Ramsay, who gave them an almost friendly smile. "Safe travels, my lord," he said. "I do hope you encounter no more brigands. If you do, feel free to send them back this way for questioning. My hounds grow bored without fresh sport." Lord Ryswell forced a brittle laugh, while Barbary bowed her head. Sansa met her gaze, giving a slight nod that she hoped conveyed both caution and solidarity. They parted with a swirl of cloaks as the gates of Winterfell opened, letting the Ryswell party ride into a world of white drifts and glinting ice. Sansa watched them vanish beyond the walls, a small knot forming in her throat. She wondered if she would ever see them again, or if their quest for alliances would end in tragedy. But she knew at least one truth. The seeds of discontent remained alive in the north, hidden beneath layers of snow. After their departure, Winterfell's routine reasserted itself. Sansa spent her mornings in the Great Hall, hearing petitions from local villagers. She worked with the steward to monitor the winter stores. She tried to keep Ramsay appeased enough that he left her to these tasks, since he found little joy in such administrative matters. Occasionally, he would call her to ride with him, to watch him hunt or to stand by his side while he boasted about his skill. She complied, wearing a practiced smile, aware that any sign of open reluctance might arouse his suspicions. She had to endure these small indignities, telling herself that each day she stayed alive was another day closer to freedom. A fortnight after the Ryswells departed, a raven arrived from White Harbor bearing Lord Wyman Manderly's sigil. Sansa read it immediately, bracing for news of some new twist. It was an invitation, a formal request for representatives of Winterfell to attend a midwinter feast at White Harbor. Lord Manderly framed it as a celebration of the harvest that had been laid in store, a chance to reaffirm the bonds of loyalty between White Harbor and the Wardens of the North. In the letter, he addressed Sansa specifically, remarking that her presence would bring comfort to the people of White Harbor who still remembered her father's sense of justice. At first, Sansa felt a flicker of hope. Another journey to White Harbor might be a chance to gauge Lord Manderley's intentions face to face. The last time they'd visited, Manderley had subtly indicated that the North remembers and he had parted from them on cordial terms. But that was before Stannis's defeat, before months of relative quiet under the Boltons. Was Manderley still quietly resisting, or had he resigned himself to the Boltons' rule? Perhaps he simply wanted to keep Winterfell close. She took the letter to Ramsay. He read it, a bored expression on his face, then shrugged. Fine. A feast. Why not? Father may not wish to go, so we'll see if he sends me or if I remain behind. Either way, you'll attend, yes? Sansa forced a demure smile. If it pleases you, my lord. He snorted. Lord Wyman's feasts are always full of greasy pork and watery ale, from what I've heard. I suppose it's worth a ride if we can force him to feed us in style. The roads are treacherous, but the Manderleys have wealth. They ought to show it if they mean to curry our favor. We will wait for Father's word before finalizing the details. He set the letter aside and stretched in his chair. Now come, entertain me with something better than Manderley's posturing. The subtle threat in his tone made Sansa tense, but she hid it behind a mask of obedient politeness, steering the conversation toward the day's petty amusements. All the while, her mind churned with the possibilities this invitation might present. She remembered how, on their previous trip, Lord Manderley had quietly told her to have hope that the North remembered. If he was summoning them again, perhaps he had gleaned some new advantage or gleaned word of a shifting power in the South. Or he might be simply ensuring the Boltons didn't suspect him of disloyalty. Either way, Sansa would go. She would see for herself. But Roose had other ideas. At a private supper, he informed them that he had no intention of traveling to White Harbor in the heart of winter. It's a fool's errand, he said with his customary composure. We have nothing to gain by riding there, risking men on icy roads. Manderley can do as he pleases in his city, as long as he pays his taxes and keeps the trade routes open. Ramsay bristled. Are we to ignore his invitation, then? That might appear weak or insulting. Roose took a measured sip of wine. We can send a small envoy just to keep up appearances. You may go if you like, or Sansa can go in your stead. Either way, show the Manderleys we have no fear of them, but also no excessive interest in their festivities. Ramsay shot Sansa a glance. She feigned nonchalance, hoping he would let her go instead of going himself. She sensed that White Harbor might be more receptive to her presence than to Ramsay's. It proved true. Ramsay showed little interest in a chilly journey across half the north just for a feast. He mumbled something about wanting to remain in Winterfell to oversee the new hounds he was training. In the end, Roose decided Sansa would lead a small party to White Harbor, accompanied by a contingent of Bolton men for protection as well as a handful of Winterfell stewards to represent the seat's authority. It was far less grand than their previous trip, but it was official enough that Lord Manderley could not claim offense. So, a week later, Sansa found herself once again leaving Winterfell, wrapped in heavy furs against the biting wind. The courtyard echoed with the shouts of stable hands and the stamp of horses' hooves as her small caravan prepared to depart. She wore a lined hood that shadowed her face, but she kept her back straight and chin high. The Bolton guards assigned to her, perhaps a dozen, treated her with their usual mixture of deference and wariness. A few maids and stewards completed the party. Before mounting her horse, Sansa looked up at the ramparts, half expecting to see Ramsay or Roose watching her from above. But there was no sign of them. Good, she thought, sliding her foot into the stirrup. She was glad to be leaving without their smothering presence. The journey proved brutal. Bitter winds cut across the open plains and drifts sometimes rose waist-high, forcing them to deter. They sheltered in small holdfasts at night, occasionally sleeping in cramped halls. Still, Sansa found a strange sense of freedom in the journey. Away from the constant vigilance of Winterfell's halls, she could breathe more easily, her mind free to wander. The Bolton soldiers kept a watchful eye, but they did not question her every move. Now and then she rode a bit ahead on the snow-packed road, letting the crisp air fill her lungs. She imagined that if she spurred her horse hard enough, she could flee into the wilderness, vanish forever. But that was a childish fantasy. The North in winter was unforgiving, and she had a duty to those who looked to her. Running would solve nothing. Forging alliances was the only way to truly reclaim her home. At last, the high walls and towers of White Harbor came into view, rising along the frozen waters of the harbor. The city bustled with more life than Winterfell, thanks to its trade and fishing, though much was subdued by winter. Icy ships rocked in the docks, and the wind carried the tang of salt. Sansa led her caravan through the gates, past the lines of city folk who peered curiously at the Bolton banners intermingled with the dire Wolf of Stark. She felt their eyes upon her. Some wore expressions of pity, others of quiet expectation. It struck her again that, despite her public alliance with the Boltons, the North still viewed her as a Stark, a symbol of the old ways. She hoped that symbol meant something good. Inside Newcastle, Lord Wyman Manderley greeted her. He was as large and imposing as before, swathed in thick robes to ward off the cold, his many chins wobbling as he bowed. "Lady Sansa, it is a pleasure to welcome you once more to White Harbor. Your presence graces our halls like a gentle snowfall." She returned his courtesy with a curtsy, careful to keep her expression neutral. "Lord Manderley, thank you for the invitation. Winterfell sends its regards. I trust all is well here." A pointed question, one that might reveal if tension brewed. He nodded, offering a warm smile. "All is as well as it can be in these chilly days. But come, let me show you to your quarters. A feast is planned for tonight. We have fish from the harbor, fresh bread, and perhaps a few small luxuries saved for such an occasion." He gestured for her to follow. "I know your party must be weary from the road." Sansa allowed herself to be escorted deeper into the keep. Around them, Manderley servants bustled, lighting lamps, carrying bundles of furs, ensuring that the travelers from Winterfell were accommodated. The Bolton guards fanned out, watchful. Lord Wyman's men eyed them but did not interfere. On the surface, everything was polite, cordial, a performance of goodwill between White Harbor and Winterfell. Beneath the surface, Sansa sensed a crackling tension reminiscent of the day she'd first returned to Winterfell in the Boltons' company. Her assigned chamber was comfortable, with a large fireplace blazing and a window that looked out over the snowy harbor. It would do nicely for the duration of her stay. The maids helped her remove her heavy traveling cloak, then she sat by the fire, letting her numb hands thaw. She recalled the last time she had come here with Ramsay, how Manderley had been all smiles while subtly gauging the new warden's power. After that visit, she'd received a quiet message: "The North remembers, have hope." Did that sentiment still hold? She would find out soon enough at the feast. She dressed carefully in a gown of dark blue wool, trimmed with white rabbit fur about the collar, a discreet direwolf brooch at her breast. She avoided wearing the flayed man symbol, though the Bolton guards likely wore it on their tabards. Let them. She was Lady Bolton Stark in name, but her heart remained with the direwolf alone. Once she was ready, she made her way to the great hall. Tables had been set with simple but abundant food: steaming fish stews, fresh loaves, salted meats, even some honeyed pastries. Lord Wyman greeted her at the high table, seating her to his right. The Bolton captain sat further down, as was his station. Servants poured wine, and a lively murmur spread through the hall. Sansa kept her expression pleasant, though every sense was on alert, seeking any sign of what Manderley truly intended. He leaned toward her as platters of fish were served. "I trust your travels weren't too harrowing, Lady Sansa?" he asked in a grandfatherly tone. "It was manageable," she replied. "Though I confess, it's good to feel the warmth of a proper hearth again." She paused, meeting his gaze. "We appreciate your hospitality, my lord, especially in these lean times. Winter can be cruel." He nodded gravely. "Indeed, though it's said that in times of true crisis, the North stands together. We help one another survive." His eyes flickered meaningfully. "No matter the circumstances we find ourselves in." Sansa understood the subtext. She cast a brief glance at her plate, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, we do what we must. My father always believed that unity was the North's greatest strength." Lord Wyman's eyelids drooped in a half-sorrowful expression. "Your father was a fine man. His memory endures among us. My people speak of him often, especially when they recall the tragedies that have befallen your house." Sansa nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm grateful for that. Truly." She sipped her wine, aware that others at the table were conversing about more trivial matters: shipping routes, rumors of pirate raids along the Bight, local tales of monstrous dire wolves in the deep forest. But she and Lord Wyman stayed in their own small bubble of conversation. After the main courses were served, the hall grew lively with music. Minstrels strummed lutes and sang of the Merman's Court, old local ballads that Sansa recognized only faintly. She kept an eye on the Bolton soldiers. They seemed content enough, joking among themselves, not suspecting any immediate threat. Manderley's men mingled freely, though Sansa noted how few highborn knights were present. Perhaps they were absent by design, or perhaps White Harbor's best knights were stationed elsewhere, an unspoken statement of readiness. Midway through the feast, Lord Manderley rose to propose a toast to the grace and wisdom of Lady Sansa Stark, praising her role in uniting the North under stable leadership. Sansa's cheeks warmed under the public acclaim, though she knew it was as much a display for the Bolton men as for her. The hall lifted cups of ale and wine, and she murmured thanks. At that moment, she felt as though she walked a narrow ridge with the flayed man's brutality on one side and the hope of a Stark restoration on the other. One wrong step could send her and many good people tumbling into the abyss. When the toast finished and applause died down, a hush seemed to fall over Lord Manderley's immediate circle. He leaned towards Sansa and murmured, "If you have time, my lady, I would speak with you privately after the feast. I have a matter of some delicacy to discuss, one that concerns House Stark's legacy." Her pulse quickened. She inclined her head slightly, disguising her excitement. "Of course, my lord. I would be glad to speak further." They returned to the feast, each wearing a polite smile. Yet beneath Sansa's calm exterior, thoughts whirled. What did Manderley mean by House Stark's legacy? Was he planning some move against the Boltons, or had he heard news from the south? She forced herself to remain patient, to chat amiably with the neighboring guests until the feast wound down. Eventually, the minstrels finished their last tune and the guests began drifting out. The Bolton captain, growing sleepy from too much ale, retreated with his men to a side room. Sansa made her excuses and slipped away with Manderley, accompanied by only 2 of his personal guards. He led her through a maze of corridors until they came to a small study with thick walls and a heavy door, much like the one she had visited last time, though smaller. Once inside, Lord Manderley stationed his guards outside, ensuring no one overheard. Sansa felt her heart pounding as he closed the door, leaving them alone in the candlelit space. Rows of books lined the shelves, the smell of parchment mingling with the faint brine carried on his clothes. The old man sighed deeply, folding his hands over his belly. "Lady Sansa," he began in a low voice, "I apologize for bringing you here under vague pretenses, but it is safer this way. If your Bolton escort knew I intended a private meeting, they might grow suspicious. We do not want trouble in my city." Sansa nodded, forcing calm. "I understand, Lord Manderley. You said you wished to discuss House Stark's legacy?" He looked pained. "Yes. The last time you visited, I gave you reason to hope that not all the North has forgotten the Starks. That remains true. The North remembers still. Yet we are constrained by the Boltons' presence and the knowledge that, for now, you stand beside them. I do not blame you for it, my lady. I know you had little choice. But there are certain developments elsewhere in the realm that might affect us." She leaned forward, eager yet wary. "Developments?" He nodded gravely. "Word travels slowly, especially in winter, but I have corresponded with certain traders and discreet allies. There is talk of a Targaryen claimant in the east, some say Daenerys Storeborn with dragons. Others claim a lost Targaryen prince in the disputed lands. The rumors are conflicting, but if any Targaryen truly gains a foothold in Westeros, it could spark a great war. The Lannisters are weakened by infighting and by debts to the Iron Bank. The Tyrells posture but are uncertain. Dorne seethes over the murder of Elia Martell. There is tinder everywhere, just waiting for a spark. His voice dropped lower. In such chaos, the Boltons' hold on the North might weaken. If we time it correctly, if we stand together with other Stark loyalists, we might cast them down. Sansa's breath caught. It was exactly the scenario Ryswell had hinted at. But we have no guarantee a Targaryen would help the North free itself from the Boltons, she cautioned. They might demand our fealty in return. Manderley nodded. Yes, they likely will. And that is the bargain the North must consider. We cannot stand alone if we hope to break the flayed man's grip unless the Vale or Riverlands also rise. But the Vale remains an enigma. Lord Baelish is cunning and young Lord Robert Arryn is easily swayed. We do not know if they'll lift a finger to help. As for the Riverlands, they are fractured with the Freys entrenched at the Twins. Sansa frowned, remembering how her mother's family, the Tullys, had once ruled the Riverlands before the Freys and Lannisters crushed them. So what do you propose? She asked, forcing her voice to remain calm. Lord Manderley ran a hand over his bearded chin. For now, we do nothing openly. But we remain vigilant. We forge quiet ties among houses that remain loyal to the Starks, houses like the Ryswells, the Mormonts, perhaps even the Umbers if we can coax them. We share information, keep each other abreast of changes. Then, if the day comes when the Boltons are distracted or threatened from the south, we strike. We restore the Stark name fully to Winterfell. And you, Lady Sansa, would be the key to uniting us. A shiver ran through her. It was what she had dreamed of ever since she returned to Winterfell, but it came with a heavy price. If we fail, she whispered, Ramsay and Roose will slaughter all who stood against them. Manderley's expression turned grim. That is the risk. We must be sure not to move prematurely. And that is why I summoned you. I wish to reaffirm your place at the center of this. to ensure you have not turned wholly to the Boltons' side. Because if you warn them of our plans, we are finished." He fell silent, letting her answer hang in the air. Sansa felt the candlelight dancing against her cheeks. Memories flashed through her mind. Her father's execution, her mother and brother butchered at the twins, her forced marriage to Ramsay, the silent fear that had haunted her steps every day in Winterfell. Then she saw the glimmer of hope in the eyes of those who whispered, "The North remembers." She squared her shoulders. "I remain a Stark," she said firmly, "no matter what name the Boltons force upon me. I will never forget what they did to my family, to my home. I do what I must to survive and to protect the North in what ways I can until the day comes when we can be free of them." A spark of relief lit Lord Manderley's gaze. "That is all I needed to hear. Then the rest we leave to time and caution. I ask only that you watch for any cracks in the Boltons' armor. If Roose or Ramsay shows a weakness, or if a southern threat looms, let us know. I will do the same if I learn of new alliances forming. With each small sign, we move closer to reclaiming the North." She bowed her head, struggling to steady her voice. "Thank you for your faith, my lord." He offered a sad smile. "The faith is not mine alone, it belongs to every Northerner who still clings to the memory of Ned Stark's honor. You are his daughter, and that means something in this land. We only pray the day of reckoning comes sooner rather than later." They spoke a while longer, hashing out details of how to exchange messages discreetly. Manderley had a trusted merchant who traveled occasionally to Winterfell, delivering salted fish and grain. That merchant, if given a specific token, would pass on coded letters. Sansa agreed to leave certain notes in Winterfell's library, smuggled out by a loyal scribe if needed. It all felt dangerous, but also necessary. She reminded herself that she could not simply ignore the chance to oust the Boltons. This was her duty as a Stark. When they finished, Manderley escorted her back through the corridors, adopting an air of casual joviality as soon as they neared the Bolton guard. To them, it seemed they had merely discussed trifling matters of trade. Sansa played along, smiling politely. That night, she returned to her chambers with her heart pounding, thoughts swirling. She recognized that she was now more deeply entangled in rebellion than ever. Should the Boltons discover this conspiracy, she would face unimaginable consequences. But the alternative was to watch her home remain in the grip of monsters. She had seen enough to know that sometimes a darker path must be walked for the sake of a brighter future. The next morning, Sansa rose early. Her Bolton escort was eager to return to Winterfell, disliking the idea of traveling so far in the dead of winter. She bid farewell to Lord Manderley, exchanging polite words in the courtyard. No one suspected that beneath those pleasantries lay a pledge of alliance against House Bolton. By midday, they set out again, plodding through the snowbound roads back west. The journey seemed even longer on the return, but Sansa's mind was full of Manderley's revelations, fueling her with cautious hope. It was on the third day of travel that disaster nearly struck. Snow whipped across a narrow stretch of road skirting a frozen marsh, forcing the party to slow to a crawl. White flurries swirled, stinging eyes and making it hard to see more than a few yards ahead. Sansa rode near the front, her horse snorting clouds of steam. The Bolton captain and a handful of guards trudged behind, trying to keep formation. Suddenly, the guard at the lead shouted. Shapes emerged out of the storm, a band of ragged men with bows and spears. The ambush was swift. An arrow hissed past Sansa's ear, burying itself in the saddle of the guard ahead. Another arrow struck a horse in the flank. That shrieked, toppling onto the slushy path. The Bolton men scrambled for cover, shouting curses, returning fire with crossbows. Sansa's heart thundered. She ducked low on her horse, scanning for any route to safety. The attackers, perhaps 5 or 6 in total, wore patched cloaks and bits of mismatched armor. Their faces were half concealed by scarves. She heard one of them yell, "Give us your supplies or die in the snow." Another loosed an arrow that clattered off the mail of a Bolton guard. "Bandits!" the captain roared. "Cut them down!" The Bolton men fanned out, trying to flank the ambushers. The wind howled, making it impossible to see if more attackers lurked. Sansa's mare sidestepped nervously, nearly knocking her to the ground. She gripped the reins fiercely, cursing herself for not staying deeper in the column. The fight broke out in earnest. Swords rang, arrows zipped, men cursed and slipped in the slush. Sansa spotted one attacker swinging a makeshift axe at a guard's shield. Another was grappling with a Bolton soldier in the snow, trying to drive a knife into his gut. Realizing she was exposed, Sansa tried to maneuver her horse behind a wagon, but the frightened animal reared at the clamor. She lost her balance and slid sideways from the saddle, landing hard on her right shoulder, pain flaring through her arm. She scrambled for footing in the deep snow, struggling to stand. The world was a spinning chaos of white flakes and thrashing bodies. An arrow hissed overhead, forcing her to duck. She heard a Bolton guard shout, "Protect the lady!" But no one came immediately to her side. Another arrow struck the wagon with a dull thunk. Her heart hammered. She scanned desperately for a safe corner but found none. Suddenly, one of the bandits lunged through the swirling snow, brandishing a short spear. His face was wrapped in cloth, so only his fierce eyes showed. Before she could react, he had the spear aimed at her chest. Terror seized her, and she tried to back away, but her legs sank in the drift. "This is how I die," she thought, in the snow, far from the real war, at the hands of a nameless bandit. But before he could thrust, a crossbow bolt slammed into his side. He staggered, spewing a gasp of shock. Another bolt struck him in the chest, and he collapsed face first, blood staining the snow. Behind him stood one of the Bolton soldiers, a crossbow in hand, panting clouds of steam. He nodded grimly at Sansa, then spun to engage another foe. She staggered backward, half-blind with panic, searching for any sign of safer ground. In the next moments, the Bolton guards rallied. Their crossbows found marks, and the bandits, realizing they were outmatched, began to flee. One took a bolt in the back and fell, howling. Another escaped into the white gloom. The entire skirmish ended as swiftly as it began, leaving 2 Bolton men wounded and at least 3 bandits dead in the snow. The rest had vanished, leaving the swirling flakes to cover the blood. Sansa's heart pounded so hard she could hardly breathe. The Bolton captain rushed over, face grim. "My lady, are you harmed?" She shook her head, though her shoulder ached and her gown was damp from the snow. I'm fine," she stammered. "Who were they?" He spat. "Scum from the woods, desperate for supplies. Or cunning cutthroats who heard we were passing. No matter. We've driven them off. We'll see to the wounded and move on." He helped her to her feet and whistled for another horse, since her mare had bolted a short distance in terror. His men began stripping whatever valuables they could from the dead bandits, muttering curses all the while. As Sansa remounted, wincing at the pain in her shoulder, she thought how close she had come to dying on this nameless road. It struck her that the North in winter was dangerous not just because of the Boltons or rebellious houses, but because desperation itself lurked everywhere. The realm had been at war for too long, and countless men had turned to banditry. She shivered, thanking the guard who had saved her life. He offered a curt nod. In that moment, she realized that even a Bolton soldier could become a reluctant protector when they recognized her rank and value. The realization was sobering. The rest of the journey passed without further ambush, though they remained vigilant. When at last they crossed the threshold of Winterfell's main gate, Sansa felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. The towering walls and the sight of the flayed man banner reminded her of how precarious her situation remained. She might have survived the bandit's spear, but she still walked among more dangerous predators, Ramsay and Roose. Yet that same day, her mind flicked to Manderly's words, to Ryswell's quiet vow, to all those who whispered that the North remembers. She had not lied to Lord Wyman. She would remain a Stark in her heart, and if an opportunity came, if the realm's chaos gave her an opening, she would do everything in her power to restore her family's name to its rightful seat. Winter deepened, and the days fell into a gray monotony. Sansa resumed her tasks in Winterfell, writing letters, settling disputes, enduring Ramsay's presence when he demanded it. Outwardly, little changed, but inwardly she felt the subtle thread connecting her to the Manderlys, the Ryswells, perhaps even others. It was a secret network of hope, albeit tenuous and fraught with risk. Each day, she prayed that the impetus for a rebellion or a southern intervention would not be too long in coming, for with each day that passed, the Boltons grew more entrenched, and Sansa worried that her own patience, her own moral fortitude, might fray beneath the constant burden of pretense. One frosty morning, as she walked the battlements, she spotted Theon Greyjoy, a reek, shuffling across the courtyard below, carrying a bundle of firewood. She watched him pause, head bowed, a figure of utter misery. He must have felt her eyes upon him, for he glanced up. Their gazes met. She saw a flicker of something in his expression, fear, shame, perhaps a plea. Then he hurried on, hunched beneath his rags. A pang of pity stabbed her heart. She remembered that Theon had once been like a brother to Robb. He had betrayed them, yes, yet now he was broken beyond reckoning. She wondered, fleetingly, if he could be useful in any future plan against Ramsay. but Theon was too shattered to stand against his tormentor. For all her pity, she did not see how he could help free the north. Sighing, she continued along the ramparts, the wind biting at her cheeks. A few days later, she received a coded note delivered by a stable hand, an innocuous slip of parchment hidden in the lining of a feed bag. Inside, it read simply, "We gather. Watch for the crane in spring. M." She burned the note at once, her mind racing. Manderley was telling her that something might happen come spring, or at least that was how she interpreted the cryptic message. Perhaps allies from the south or the Vale would move then. Crane might be a reference to House Crane, or a literal crane bird as a symbol, or something else entirely. She did not know, but it signaled that their plan was alive. She braced herself for the slow turning of the seasons. In the north, winter could drag on, but spring always came eventually. Through all these tense weeks, Sansa maintained her composure, attending dinners with Roose Bolton, smiling politely at Ramsay's jokes, receiving lords who ventured to Winterfell with news of their lands. Her very ability to act the gracious lady was a weapon in its own right, for it lulled the Boltons into believing she was reconciled to their regime. She wrote letters to the Manderleys, couched in mundane details about trade, trusting that Lord Wyman would read between the lines. She waited for letters from the Riswells, but none came. Perhaps they had gone deeper south in search of alliances. She could only hope they were safe. Meanwhile, Ramsay took perverse delight in reminding everyone who truly held the sword in the north. He ordered brutal punishments for small offenses, flaying a stable boy who had attempted to run away, setting his hounds on the occasional unfortunate traveler who refused to pay a toll on the King's Road. The tales reached Sansa's ears through servants' whispers, and she locked herself in her chamber sometimes, breathing through waves of disgust. If only the rest of the realm could see what the North suffered under Bolton rule, she thought they would come to help. But she knew better than to rely on the illusions of southern benevolence. The lords of the south had their own troubles. One late afternoon, a hush fell over the keep as Roose Bolton arrived back from a brief journey to the Dreadfort. He came with a small retinue and promptly summoned Sansa and Ramsay to the Solar. She entered to find Roose standing by the fire, his pale eyes reflecting the flames, his posture as rigid as ever. Ramsay lounged in a chair, tapping his foot impatiently. Sansa curtsied and waited, heart fluttering with unease. Roose was not a man to call meetings lightly. "We have business," Roose said in his cold, quiet manner. "I have received word from the Freys at the Twins. They claim unrest in the Riverlands again. Some outlaws styling themselves Knights of the Old Tully Line, or perhaps the Brotherhood without banners, have been harassing Frey supply lines. The Freys fear an insurrection might grow if not stamped out." Ramsay sniffed. "What do we care if the Freys are harassed? Let them deal with it." Roose shot him a disapproving glare. "We care because the Freys were instrumental in our alliance with the Lannisters. If they look weak, it might encourage other rebellious elements, including those in the north. Chaos in the Riverlands might spill over. We cannot allow that." Sansa kept her face impassive, though inside she recognized that the Bolton-Frey Lannister alliance was the cornerstone that had toppled her family. Anything that weakened it could be a boon for Stark loyalists. But obviously Roose wanted to maintain that alliance, seeing it as crucial to the Boltons' hold on the north. Roose continued, "The Freys request some token of our support. Not an army, but skilled men to help them track these outlaws, demonstrate solidarity. I will send a small detachment, commanded by you, Ramsay." Ramsay's eyes lit with a predatory gleam. "A hunt? I do enjoy a good hunt." "Very well, father. I'll ride south, show these outlaws how the Boltons deal with rebels." Roose nodded. "Yes, and take some of our best. Make certain the Freys see that we do not shy from mutual defense." Sansa felt relief that Roose did not suggest she go. She wanted no part of another war party, especially not one that supported the Freys. Still, she forced a polite inquiry. "How long might you be gone, my lord?" Ramsay shrugged. "As long as it takes to gut these outlaws." "Why will you miss me?" He gave her a sharp grin, as though he found the notion amusing. She dipped her head, feigning modesty. "I merely wish to know how I should arrange matters in your absence." He let out a short laugh and turned to Roose. "That's the advantage, father, in having a Stark bride. She can keep the household in order while we handle important tasks." Roose's lips barely twitched. "Indeed, Sansa will remain here, continuing her duties. I will likely remain at the Dreadfort or travel between it and Winterfell. Send word if you require anything." With that, the matter was decided. Ramsay would depart in a fortnight. leading a force of Bolton men to assist the Freys in suppressing outlaws in the Riverlands. Sansa realized this might be the crack the conspirators needed, Ramsay and a portion of Bolton's strength gone south. If a Targaryen invasion or some rebellion flared while Ramsay was away, it could leave Winterfell vulnerable. Her heart raced at the thought, but she dared not show it. She simply curtsied again and withdrew, letting the Bolton men plan their deployment. As the days passed and Ramsay prepared for his journey, Sansa felt an odd sense of anticipation. She wondered if word would spread, if Manderly or Ryswell or any others who whispered "the North remembers" would seize this chance. But she had to be careful not to do anything that might tip Roose off. She went about her routine with normalcy, making sure that shipments of grain arrived, greeting minor lords, occasionally writing letters about trade. She wrote one carefully worded missive to White Harbor, mentioning only that Ramsay would be gone for some time, though she couched it in talk of Bolton-Frey cooperation. She prayed Lord Manderly would understand the subtext. Finally, the day of Ramsay's departure arrived. The courtyard bustled with soldiers saddling horses, loading wagons, checking gear. Ramsay strutted about, barking orders, while Roose stood on the steps, expressionless. Sansa watched from near the gate. The wind was fierce, whipping her cloak around her. Ramsay's hunting hounds snarled at each other, tethered to a small wagon. She felt a wave of revulsion. With luck, the hounds and their master would find some Frey misfortune in the south. Ramsay approached her, giving her a mocking little bow. "Wish me luck, my sweet wife," he crooned. "I'll be sure to bring you back a trophy from the Riverlands, maybe a strip of outlaw hide." She forced a controlled smile, though she longed to spit at him. "Safe travels, my lord. We shall hold Winterfell in your absence." He stroked her cheek with the back of his gloved hand, making her skin crawl. "Oh, I'm sure you will." Then he turned and vaulted onto his waiting horse. With a barked command, he led the column out through the gates. Sansa watched them pass beneath the looming walls, watched the flayed man banner fade into the whiteness of the road. A hush fell over the courtyard once they were gone. The lines of watchers dispersed, returning to their tasks. She felt a rush of conflicting emotions: relief, dread, excitement, fear. Ramsay was gone, taking a chunk of the Bolton might with him. Roose remained, but with fewer men, and a portion of the Dread Fort garrison was also presumably on the move. If something were to happen in the north, it might happen soon. But what that something might be, she could not guess. It could be a letter from Manderly, urging revolt, or an army from the Vale, or some new Targaryen threat. Or perhaps nothing would happen at all, leaving them all in uneasy limbo. Whatever the case, Sansa would be ready. She tightened her cloak around herself, the direwolf pin at her shoulder glinting in the gray daylight. She thought of her father again and of all her lost family. In this broken realm, with winter tightening its grip, she had chosen to stand with the Boltons for the sake of survival, but in truth, she stood only for House Stark. And if an opportunity arose to tip the balance of power, she would seize it without hesitation. From the battlements above, a guard called out that the supply wagons were returning from a nearby village. Sansa turned and walked back into the keep, footsteps echoing. Winterfell's corridors felt no warmer, but she carried a small spark inside her, fueled by everything she had learned from Ryswell, Manderly, and her own experiences. Perhaps soon that spark would become a flame if the forces of fate allowed it. Until then, she would keep watch, keep faith, and keep her mask firmly in place. The North remembered, and so did she. No matter how long it took, no matter the sacrifices required, she would see her family's legacy restored. The Boltons might hold Winterfell today, but tomorrow was yet unwritten, and winter, for all its cruelty, eventually gave way to spring.